Welcome.
There we go.
Just looking to see who we're missing. Meg, will Leslie be joining us today? Okay.
Yes, she should be.
That's an ugly hummer.
Anyone else hear that buzzing sound, or is that
Yeah.
just on my computer?
Well, now I don't hear it.
It's gone now.
Okay, Meg, unless there's any objection from anyone, I think I'd like to start the meeting, and then if Leslie joins in, I'll just make reference to her participation. Everyone else ready? All right. So if we're ready and being recorded, I will start. I'd like to call this meeting the order. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Nantucket Planning Board for the purpose of discussing articles posted in the agenda for February 7th, 2022. We are conducting this meeting by a Zoom webinar and remote participation pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order regarding open meeting law. I would first like to identify the members of the board and staff, so please confirm your presence when I call your name. Dave Iverson, Vice Chair.
Here.
Nat Lowell.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
Barry Rector.
Here.
And if we have alternates, I see Stephen Welch.
Here.
And I do not see Cam.
I'm here. Can you hear
Hello,
me?
Cam. Oh, excellent. Welcome. I see Leslie
Thank
has
you.
joined us, so I'll the staff. Leslie Snell. Welcome.
I'm here. Thank you.
Meg Trudell,
Here.
Catherine Ansaro,
Here.
and Andrew Vorse, Planning Director.
Here.
Great. Okay, I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
To move.
Moved has been made
I'll-
by
I'll
Barry, and
second.
seconded by Nat. Roll call.
Yeah.
Barry,
Aye.
Nat,
Aye.
Dave Iverson,
Aye.
and Fritz McClure.
Aye.
Great. Okay. Any motions, comments by the board before we get into the main? Seeing none, we did not anticipate a re-endorsement by the chair prior to 48 hours. So I would ask for a re-endorsement of Maple Lane subdivision plans. And the reason being, when we endorsed these already, we had a makeup of a different board, and that was with our previous chair, Judith. So I'm looking for a motion to re-endorse those plans with our new members. Any discussion, or is there a motion?
Make that motion.
I'll second.
Talk about the Maple Lane, right?
Correct. This is only for the re-endorsement that we've already approved
Yeah.
previous meetings. Motion's
Yeah.
been made for re-endorsement by Nat and second by Dave Iverson. Roll call, Nat.
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
and Barry.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Okay, now on to the warrant articles. We're going to be starting with Article 53. This is, we had discussed this in the previous meeting on the 31st, I believe. We are going to look to amend or open for discussion, the removal of the regularity formula in number 4 that we had highlighted. We wanted to continue this to this meeting for discussion, and I believe we kept the public hearing open on this. So first, I'll open it up to the board with any kind of comments or discussion. Seeing none, I will have the board reserve any comments for after I open up to the public. So it is now open to the public. So I would ask that Meg assist in letting me know if there's someone that is logging on or has a question or would like to discuss.
And for anyone tuning in, member of the public, this is only for Article 53. So we'll get to the other public hearings later on. So we have Emily Molden with her hand raised.
Hi, Emily, welcome back. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Emily Molden here, and I'm sure the board remembers I had made some comments on this particular article at your meeting last week, specifically in reference to the proposed change for the regularity formula to allow waiving of it through a special amendment process or a special permit process rather. And I think the only comment I really wanted to add at the offset based upon some of the discussion at your last meeting was just with regard to the concept that this would somehow be beneficial as far as creation of housing. And I guess I just wanted to make it clear, at least my interpretation from this is that there's nothing in here that would guarantee that the type of subdivision or lot creation or housing from special permits waiving the regularity formula would be the type of housing that the community necessarily needs, but there's nothing to prevent it from just being additional market rate lots. And I guess I just wanted to throw that out there because I remembered some discussion that made it sound as though this would be one way to help stimulate the type of housing the community needs. And I just don't really see anything in here that does that. So I wanted to put that out there as well. And I'm interested in the board's discussion around this because I still am pretty concerned about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Meg, is there anyone else out there in the public who would comment on this particular article?
I'm not seeing anyone.
We have to close this or?
We would have to close it. I'm just giving it a couple more minutes since the meeting just opened.
Sure.
And I know this was discussed in a lot of detail at the previous meeting. So obviously we're looking to amend and remove number 4. And I'll just read it for the public that we're planning to amend and remove. The planning board may issue a special permit to waive compliance with the regularity factor for a lot, provided that the planning board finds that such waiver does not negatively impact access to lots and does not result in the creation of lots that would have a negative impact on the character and surrounding neighborhood. So that is what we're looking to remove entirely. Leslie, your hand is raised, please.
I just want to clarify that as far as, the paragraphs in the article, your motion or our suggested motion for you is to, recommend Article 53 with item number 3 removed.
Correct.
It's
Yes.
item number 3 in the
Oh,
article.
sorry. Okay. Yeah, the highlighted section is parentheses 4, but it is item number 3. Correct. And that will be clear through staff and the motion. Meg, any other hands raised in the general audience or public?
No. Seeing none.
Then I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
I didn't hear who made that first motion. Nat was
I
seconded.
think it was me on that.
And I'll
I think
second.
I moved and Barry seconded.
Motion's been made to close the public hearing by Nat, seconded by Barry. Roll call Nat.
Aye.
Barry,
Aye.
Dave Iverson,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Now on to the merits. Is there a
I
motion
make a
or
motion.
still discussion? Yes, Dave.
I'd make a motion to endorse Article 43, strike number 3.
As a positive
So strike
recommendation,
number
you're
3 out of
saying?
Article. Yes, and a positive recommendation.
Okay, motion's been made for a positive recommendation with the removal of amend number 3. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made by Dave, seconded by Nat. Roll call. Dave,
Aye.
Nat,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Barry,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Thank you very much. Now we'll be going on to article number 52. And I believe this is the workforce housing with the zoning, adding R10 to the zoning district. Meg, would you like to comment on anything?
No, if maybe Leslie has comments though, or explanation.
Okay, Leslie?
I feel like we're passing the hot potato here. I think Andrew did the most research on this. I expected that he wanted to speak on that, but if he doesn't, I can certainly at least start out with the introduction. So this is for the workforce housing ownership provision in the bylaw. This request, I believe, came through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to look into adding additional districts where this is allowed. We looked at R10 and R20. R20 was just spread out in too many places in the town and the country in areas without water and sewer and other infrastructure. So the article proposes just to add of the workforce housing special permit provision to the R10. And we have changed the, I guess the factor, the bonus factor from 1.33, which is in R5, to 1.2 in R10. And that would allow, if you had 2 lots, you could apply for the special permit and have 3 lots is the math on that. So there are, there's a very limited area that this would apply. It's all mid-island. It's where, infill development is, encouraged as part of the master plan and the town overlay district. It's where we have, bus service for the schools, for NRTA, bike paths, sidewalks. It's walkable to the mid-island. Most of the R10 is in the mid-island area. We think that's an appropriate location, to expand this housing option.
Town water, town sewer.
Yes.
Okay. Leslie, if I don't want to cut you off, but if you're finished with the presentation, I see Andrew voice. Your hand is up.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, Leslie, I think you said 2 lots, and I think the correct calculation is 3 here. We employed a different standard. The R5 is a little bit higher at 1.33, and at 1.2, you basically have to have the equivalent of 3 lots in order to qualify, and that would give you a bonus lot. So again, we looked as carefully, I think, as we could through the R10 to see where that, where there might be qualified parcels, and you have a list of those that was provided to you. So there are a few such areas, but again, there's enough, there's other options for R10 besides this. So, but this does at least give you another tool in the toolbox for potential projects in that area. So,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Cam, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I sort of had a question. I think I'm a little confused on it, but I may be the only one. So is this, let's say in the R10, is that where you would have 30,000 square feet and you would be able to divide it into 4 lots? Andrew, was that what
Yes,
the map was coming out with?
yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that was the case versus if you had 10,000 square feet, you could divide it into 3 lots, that kind of thing. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, anybody else on the board? Questions or comments before I open up to the public? Seeing none, I will open it up to the public. Meg, please identify anyone if for me and let me know.
We have Brooke Moore with her hand raised.
Okay, hi Brooke, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say, as a member of the Affordable Housing Trust, the opportunity to make the development of workforce housing, particularly under special permit with, an encouraged deed restricted year-round housing at a little bit with that bonus option is really important in terms of making the development of something like this more affordable, both to a private developer and to the housing trust ourselves or people, when we put out RFPs. So I think this is a really good idea.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Meg, is there anyone else from the public that would wish to comment?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Seeing none or hearing none.
Hold on. We have Brian Sullivan.
I'm sorry, was that Fran?
Brian Sullivan. Sully.
Oh, Brian. Hi, Brian, welcome. How are you?
Hey, John, thanks for having me. Brian Sullivan, member of the Affordable Housing Trust. I just will echo Brooke's comments for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm not seeing any others, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I would entertain a motion from the board to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Barry and seconded by Fritz. Close public hearing. Roll call, Barry,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Nat,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Now on to the merits.
Make a motion for a positive recommendation for town meeting.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made for a positive recommendation by Barry and seconded by Fritz. Roll call, Barry,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Nat,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Okay, now we'll be going to talk about Articles 42 and 43 on short-term rentals. As before with the previous meeting, I am going to be recusing myself on the advice from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Board of Ethics for potential conflict of interest in the future for any comments that I would make, because I am a licensed real estate professional. So any comments that I make could be construed in a different way. So I am going to be signing off and handing this over to the vice chair, Dave Iverson, that will be acting as the chair. So what I would like all comments to go through the chair, and I would like to remind everyone, including the public, to be respectful and remember we're all neighbors working for a common goal. So please, with that, I am going to log out and hand that over to Dave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We'll miss you. Just a couple ground rules real quick. we're gonna open the meeting for both Articles 42 and 43 for public discussion in this process. We're gonna have Andrew say a few words first. Board members will speak and ask questions of town council. Then we'll public meeting. When we do, please raise your digital hand. We're going to give everyone a minute. There's a fair amount of people, so we're going to be succinct, please. Don't repeat yourself or we will interrupt you. Personal attacks, we will not warn you, we'll just disconnect. So please, let's be respectful and have a good discussion about this. So let's start off with Andrew, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to, I guess, walk you all through Article 42. I may have some questions on Article 43 when get to that. Also, I think joining us is Robin Stein from KP Law. So if you, she may want to weigh in on any of these items, but certainly she's here to answer questions and to assist us since KP Law did help us with the development of these bylaws. So Robin, can you hear us okay?
I'm here. Thank you.
So Article 42 was developed by the staff, and it was developed in conjunction with the non-zoning bylaw articles, which are Articles 39, 40, and 41. The point here is that they were intended to be both adopted together, but because they are both different in terms of who recommends them and the quantum of vote, etc., they are separate articles. We have suggested, and in my conversations with you, Vice Chairman Iverson, we've talked about how the planning board article could be structured to refer to the planning board's support of Article 39, and at some point we'll get into that a little bit. So there's 3 sections of Article 42 to just run through here. The first section amends definitions. So that's section 2A of the bylaw. The first one is in regard to apartment buildings. And basically this makes it clear that the planning board in its deliberations can put conditions prohibiting short-term rentals in all or portion of the dwelling unit. So, and that's specified right up front. Not had too many applications for this, but the apartment building bylaw was developed to create really year-round housing and other affordable types of housing to meet our needs. The short-term rental bylaw is following basically the state law defining short-term rental. And in addition, it also clarifies that the short-term rentals are allowed by right as a principal use. And that's important because the legality of short-term rentals is the main part of the Styler case and some of the ongoing arguments over short-term rentals in zoning. So we've talked about the Styler case before at prior meetings. I think most of you have had a chance to review that and that particular decision, and if you haven't, you should. The second section talks about, and the planning board as a condition for short-term rentals in workforce housing projects. We were successful in negotiating short-term rentals in the Richmond project when the board reviewed that, and that particular project was not appealed. But again, you've already heard from town council about the importance of putting these factors into the bylaw, so there isn't any surprise. The last section amends section 15, and section 15 is about accessory uses. So it is not about principal uses, it's about accessory uses. And here, the intent of this is to allow a long-term practice here, which is the rental of rooms within dwelling units. And what we're using the owner-occupied dwelling unit here for a couple of reasons, because owner-occupied means what we define it as, and this is again an accessory use, not the principal use, but the accessory use of the rental rooms in a property that is owned by a year-round resident, that would be an owner-occupied dwelling unit, or a seasonal owner where the occupants are here at least 3 months. That's not consecutive, that's a total of 3 months. So if you own a property and the owners are here at least 3 months, renting of rooms within that is a legal accessory use. If you're not here at least 3 months, so from 0 to 2.99 months, that use would be a principal use. So there's been some confusion about this, that somehow it's impacting people to 90 days and things like that. It's not. So that sort of covers Article 43. Now there's other factors in basically the law, which was, 237 of the Acts of 2018, which talks about what can be regulated by community. And what's in that law, it references a bylaw. It doesn't reference a zoning bylaw or a general bylaw. And many of these other things which talk about inspections, penalties for violations, reasonable fees, a provision about no outstanding enforcement actions, distance of and location of operators, regulating the class number of days, those are most effectively and properly put, in our opinion, in a general bylaw. And that is what Article 39 authorizes the Board of Health and the Select Board to develop. There be input from us on those? I think so, if we were invited to participate in that. And would that be subject to public hearings? Of course. So that is our basic approach here. And then I think the town took some extra steps here to create a segregated account where fees and fines and other things could be deposited, which again, so this is all covered. You know, basically it doesn't go into the general fund where, you know, information has to be mined out. It's basically in a separate fund. So that is, I guess, a quick overview on 42. I don't know if Robin wants to add anything or any of the other staff do.
No, I'm available if you have questions, but I don't have anything to add.
Okay. I think Article 43, like I said, I want to reserve. I have some questions for the sponsor of that. So I don't think I need to cover that right now, but anyway, as we get into the discussion, I think I would have some questions for the sponsor of that article. Thank you.
I did just bring Tobias over as a panelist, so when the board gets to questions on 43, since he's the article sponsor.
Perfect. Yeah, let's spend a little time here and then we'll invite Tobias over. I would just like to ask a real quick question of Robin, if I could. Robin, what is the scope of the restrictions that would be available to the town if they pass these bylaws as a bylaw, not as a zoning restriction?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you saying if they were to pass article?
If we were to pass the zoning board article or the planning office article, both the companion article and the zoning article, what would be the scope of the restrictions that the town could apply to short-term rentals?
So I apologize. I'm having a little trouble with the question because I see Article 42 as being a zoning land use article, and then Article 39 forth the restrictions on how short-term rentals would be used. So I apologize.
That's my question. So in Article 39, what is the scope of the restrictions that we could apply to short-term rentals?
So generally speaking, when we look at regulating new uses that have both, land use components, but then also kind of the functionality components, it's not a hard rule, but we always try to draw the line where zoning is regulating the true land use components. Where can this be used? Is this allowed use? On what properties and what zones? And then you can have a general bylaw along with that more regulates how it's used, the substance of the use, the functioning of the use. And so I think that's the line the town has drawn here between Articles 39 and Article 42 being kind of the zoning land use component, and then the operating, functionality component. Is that helpful?
Yeah, so it is. And in more basic language, what you're saying is through the 39, the town bylaw, we could restrict the amount of time things could be rented, things like that? Or
kind of how it functions. So you're saying, short-term rentals are allowed on these properties. That's our land use function. What is a short-term rental? Where is it allowed? Uniform zoning. And then you can have a general bylaw that regulates more the registering, some of the items that Andrew mentioned, 64G14, more of the kind of operating side of it. So we look at kind of the land use side as in zoning, and the operating side more in the general.
Thank you. Board members? Stephen?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to disclose for the record, similar to John Trudell, I am a licensed real estate broker and a licensed realtor. However, unlike John, as currently defined as short-term rentals, I am not, nor is my firm, been involved with any short-term rentals in the recent past, nor do we anticipate it in the recent future. So I'm comfortable to continue discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Fritz.
Thank you. Question for Robin through the chair, if I may.
Yes.
Actually, two questions. So follow up on Dave's question. I want to make sure we have this. I'll give you two examples. Could we limit under the general bylaw if we decided we wish to exclude short-term rentals from certain areas of town or the island? Could we do that through the general bylaw?
My recommendation is that should be done through a zoning bylaw, because there you're specifically talking about regulating land uses, where uses can be on the land.
Okay. Second example, and I think this is the one, Dave's asked the question, but I want to make sure that we understand the answer. Let's say that we want to restrict the bylaw under the zoning, under the general bylaw, that who can have a short-term rental?
You mean who could offer a short-term rental?
Yes. Example, obviously, residents, non-residents, seasonal residents. Could we restrict by those categories?
Depending on the nature of that regulation, it's potentially something that could go on either side, but it's certainly something that I think could go on the general side if you had a reasonable or rational basis for doing it at all. Obviously, any land use regulation is going to need to be or any regulation of the use is going to have a reasonable or rational basis for that regulation. So, we would have to take a look at exactly what that is, but whether or not there's a supportable basis for distinguishing between who's allowed to rent might be a different question.
Okay, and the third example, could we, if we chose to, in the general bylaw, impose restrictions on how many days a year a short-term rental could be rented?
I think you could do that in the general bylaw. Again, you would want to just have that basis for doing so.
Do we need a different basis than we would need to do under the zoning bylaw?
No, I'm just noting that any type of this regulation just needs to be supported with, a rational basis for the limitation or for the restriction. But I think you could do that in the general bylaw.
Okay, and last question, which is a different question. In the second paragraph of article, what is this, 42? Under short-term rental, the second paragraph says short-term rentals are allowed by right, on and on and on, unless specifically prohibited in a special permit issued by the planning board in accordance with this bylaw.
Yes.
I presume that means that we could only do that in the context of an application for a special permit?
Yes.
For some other reason?
Yeah, so what it's saying is that it's authorizing the planning board, to the extent that it is considering a special permit that might involve the use, to have as a condition that particular use that the special permit's authorizing can have short rentals.
Okay, so that would only apply within the scope of somebody who is otherwise applying for a special permit in the future.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
At least that's my reading.
Is that it, Fritz? You good?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I said thank you very much. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Andrew. Andrew, can you hear me?
Coming. Thank you,
There we
Mr.
go.
Chair. Sorry about that. So
No.
could I ask through you a question of Robin, because I think there's a little bit of confusion being sown here. That Robin, could you explain the different methods of enforcement? Because obviously enforcing a general bylaw and a zoning bylaw are quite different.
You mean if somebody's in violation?
Correct.
So, enforcement would be consistent with what the bylaw spells out. Obviously for zoning, your building commissioner can take enforcement action under the statute. They can order, direct enforcement, and that would be something that would be appealed to the zoning and appealable through the 40A process. Enforcement when it comes to the bylaw, and if you take a look at, I'm just pulling it the right section up here, section 39 that's suggested for the general bylaw spells out what the enforcement mechanisms would be there. And so if you look in section, it's 123-5, it specifies the type of enforcement, which is essentially that the town could seek to enjoin violations through any lawful process, as well as it has the 21D fine process included in here. And I believe there's also a civil penalty for violations as well. And so, again, it would, one is regulating the way the use is made, and the other is regulating that the use is allowed to be made on a certain property.
Right. Mr. Chairman, could I continue for just a bit? I just wanted to follow up.
Please.
So, Robin, when it comes to enforcing the zoning bylaw through the building commissioner and that process of notifying the violator and then following through with, all of the necessary work. Would you characterize the enforcement procedure of the general bylaw to be more effective, more, I guess, it happens quicker through personnel that would be specifically overseeing that, as opposed to the building commissioner? Has a number of different duties.
I mean, it could be more expeditious. There is a certain timing involved to the extent that the building commissioner would issue, for example, a cease and desist letter for a zoning issue. There could be an appeal to the zoning board. And then that process has statutory deadlines. Obviously, public hearing needs to be noticed in the newspaper for at least 14 days and posted. Public hearing has to be open within 65 days, decision made within 100. There's a certain timing that Chapter 40A, puts in place for those. So it's certainly conceivable that, the other lawful means that Section 123-5 talks about could happen more quickly.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Any other board members, questions, comments?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna go to Fritz real quick and then back to you, Andrew, and then I do see you, Campbell. Fritz?
Thank you again. Just another clarification on this, on basically the same topic. What would be just so everybody understand, what would be the procedure under the general bylaw if we wanted to adopt, I assume it's adopting regulations, but if we wanted to have a regulation which, say, limits the number of days of short-term rental, just as an example, what would be the process?
Well, I think that the bylaw contemplates that the Board of Health is going to promulgate regulation. They would include that in the regulations that they promulgate.
And do those regulations then need to be adopted at town meeting or by the voters in any public
So
way?
this bylaw, which is authorizing the adoption of regulations, I believe has, let me just double check, a process in it. Hold on one second. It authorizes the Board of Health to pass regulations. And then I believe it says, let's see. That the regulations are subject to the approval of the select board is what it says in section 123-4. So I believe the Board of Health would promulgate them, but they would need to be approved by the select board, is how it reads currently.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chairman,
Yes,
may I ask another question of Robin,
Yes.
please?
please.
So, Robin, part of the issue that has come up around short-term rentals is that whether the use is in fact legal and therefore protected as a grandfathered or pre-existing non-conforming use.
Yes.
So after a vote of town meeting that establishes it as such, isn't it true that there could be future amendments and the actual confirmed date of, so it would be any use that existed at the time of the vote of town meeting would become legal, and any subsequent changes that might be offered, the date that we would look back to is the date that it was actually legalized in the bylaw.
So,
Isn't that right?
well, close. So let me just get you the exact language. So again, my understanding is that the town's current interpretation of its bylaw is that these uses are permitted, and that this bylaw is being proposed to clarify that, to codify it so that there aren't continuing disputes over it. What Chapter 40A Section 6 says is that it talks about uses lawfully in existence. Let's that prior, yeah. So essentially, yes, if someone is, I don't need to quote the language for you, but if somebody is currently making that use, which the town is determined is lawful, this would be buying that use. And then it would be lawful in the bylaw thereafter regardless. So I don't know that it would change anything from the zoning side at least.
Can I give you an example?
Sure.
So if it's made legal and then in a future amendment, say next year, we proposed to say short-term rentals aren't allowed in the industrial district, for example.
Okay.
And there were 2 such uses there. And that bylaw passed, that those uses would be able to continue on as pre-existing non-conforming at that property.
Yes.
Not in the entire district, right?
Yes. Again, it would apply to uses lawfully in existence is the language. Yes.
Right.
So if uses are currently being made, they're allowed now. At some future date that changes, then any use that was not in existence on the effective date of the change, the adoption by town meeting, would not benefit from that status.
Right. So in that same example, if we had said in a general bylaw that there could be a maximum of 1, or say there could be a maximum of 1, that same protection, does that extend to that property, or would it be
So there's no there isn't the same kind of lawful pre-existing status protections afforded on the general side.
right?
The general bylaws, and again, there's case law on that. There's more complication, but generally speaking, those protections that you find in 40A6 for lawful existing uses in a zoning context do not exist on the general side. So if you make changes on the general side, they would apply going forward.
Right. And the 40A section 6 goes to a specific property, right? It doesn't go to, sort of a number in the district or anything like that.
It applies to uses lawfully in existence, building and special permits that have been issued before the first publication of the zoning change.
Right. Thank you. Great.
There's some plan freezes as well, but that gets a little bit outside of our conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, you good, Andrew? Campbell?
Hi, I just had another quick question. Just because I was noticing in a number of the letters, and we were just discussing definitions of owners, and I think I'm wondering whether, or my impression at this time is that this bylaw does not address numbers of homes owned by an entity, a person or an entity, correct? Does that make, do you get what I'm asking? Like, I think owner occupied, I think of like a property, not 10 properties. So I'm just wondering if there's anything in Article 42 that is going to address more of the, for lack of better wording, I guess, investment owners.
Or do you want me to try on that one?
Andrew, that was directed to you.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't, because this is about the use of the property. It's not about who owns it. There may be a possibility, I think, in the general bylaw to explore that. Originally talked about at the planning board, some sort of redefinition of what constitutes a hotel, what constitutes, some of the transient residential facilities. but we found that there's basically some problems with the existing bylaws as well. So it's something that we just really couldn't put together this year. But I think, again, if it's, and Robin, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if it's properly tied to, again, some justifiable standard, I think it could be in a general bylaw.
Okay, great. Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tobias, I'm going to put you on the on deck circle for just a couple minutes here until we get to your article. And then we'll give you the floor. Okay, so just hold on a few more minutes. Robin, could I ask you real quick, if we wanted to further regulate SPRs through the town, through town bylaws, not zoning, we could create more regulation through the town meeting process, right? We're not just counting on the health department and the Board of Selectmen.
So
correct?
you certainly amend, if Article 39 passes as a bylaw, then you could amend that in the future. You could pass other bylaws. The regulations passed by the Board of Health and approved by the Selectmen, just scope of the bylaw itself, under the bylaw.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stephen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. For you, Robin, a quick question on nuisance 123, section 123-4 under the regulations. So, I mean, it looks to me as if this article basically codifies how this program will be run, and regulations are left to the Board of Health, subject to the approval of the Select Board. Where I have a question is with respect to nuisance. Are there other communities you've worked with that the last sentence indicates there are some specific examples of a nuisance, unreasonable noise, overburden of parking areas? And then it goes on to say, and other nuisance conditions. And I'm curious if you could maybe elaborate on what other nuisance conditions may be applicable. And then also overall with respect to nuisance conditions, how strictly they need to be related. So I'd just like to get a little background on that. Thank you.
So, unfortunately, we're really working on the early stages on a lot of communities of these, so I can't really give you any particular examples on that. Again, any regulations that are just need to be reasonable. They need to be clear so that folks can understand what is and is not expected of them. But I imagine that's something that if this article passes, the Board of Health will work through, and will certainly be available to help them as they work through it.
Okay. And then the second part of that was how strictly, there needs, obviously I would consider there needs to be a rational nexus, but how strictly is this, in your legal estimation, need to be followed? In terms of establishing the regulations for nuisance, like can the Board of Health say, well, we don't like the color blue on the door, that's a nuisance? Obviously, that's a wild example in order to kind of not muddy the topic.
Again, it's difficult to talk in hypotheticals, but all regulations need to be rational and they need to be reasonably related to a purpose. So it would depend on what they are. Unfortunately, I don't really know what's contemplated currently. This is more of I think a general issue and a regulatory issue if the bylaw passes, as opposed to a zoning issue.
Okay, so thank you. So last question through you, Mr. Chair. So one of these may be, since the Board of Health regulations regulate the number of persons per bedroom based upon certain standards, that there could be an occupancy, which is not uncommon in multiple codes in the Massachusetts. I'm not advocating for or against, I'm just trying to understand the extent of the regulations. So that could be one of them.
So for example, if you're talking Title V, there may be language included in the Board of Health regulation, the occupancy can't exceed what the Title V is approved for. That's something that, in my opinion, would be very reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good example.
Barry, you had your hand up at one moment. You're good. Anybody else? Comments, questions? Alrighty then, I'm gonna bring, Tobias is here. I'm gonna recognize Tobias to speak to his article. The floor is yours, Tobias.
Thank you, Chairman Iverson and members of the planning board. I just have a brief, just a little statement talking about the article. I've been having lots of conversations over the last 2 years about this subject, so thank you for your deliberation. My name is Tobias Glidden. I'm a 10th generation Nantucketer. I grew up here on Nantucket, and Nantucket is my home. As many of you know, I'm the son of a fishmonger. My family has owned Glidden's Island Seafood out here on the island since 1898. I own a small solar company on the island and a electric bike rental company that services a lot of short-term rentals in the summer. I've been a longtime advocate for year-round housing, and with the support of the planning board, I spearheaded the effort to pass the Neighborhood First program, which provided $20 million to invest in island housing. Like many of you know, the island is not my business, it's my home. I'm the sponsor of the Citizens article currently labeled Article 43 that would amend Nantucket zoning bylaws to allow short-term rentals as an accessory use in all residential districts. This proposal came out of many conversations over the past year with year-round residents and seasonal residents who are concerned about protecting residents' rights to short-term rent their homes, while also protecting neighborhoods from the expansion of commercial short-term rental enterprises within residential neighborhoods. That's exactly what the Citizens article addresses. First, it would protect the ability of year-round residents to continue to short-term rent their homes by right. Second, seasonal or part-time residents in residential neighborhoods would also be able to continue to short-term rent their homes with a one-time special permit with the finding that their short-term rental is an accessory use. This one-time special permit fits well within the ZBA's current ongoing responsibilities, with the opportunity to streamline the application process to make it simple and straightforward for applicants and the board. As many of us are aware, the recent court decision, Styler versus Linfield, threatens residents' rights to short-term rent their homes in residential neighborhoods. And this Citizens article is necessary to protect both seasonal and year-round residents who want to continue to short-term rent their homes. This court decision also gives us an important opportunity to keep Nantucket's vacation rental economy local. We all know that rentals are a large sector of our economy, and we all know that it's important to keep the profits from those short-term rentals on the island. And third, it would prohibit purely commercial short-term rental enterprises in residential zoning districts and discourage the conversion of year-round housing stock into short-term rental businesses. The Citizens article would not make any changes to existing zoning bylaws in commercial districts. The Citizens article is a reasonable solution to protect our community and focuses on welcoming visitors to the island through seasonal residential rentals. Large commercial short-term rental enterprises in residential neighborhoods have never been part of our island tradition. In fact, these types of investment portfolios have only recently come into our local economy and have been expanded with off-island corporate investors buying our homes on Nantucket for commercial use. It's important to note that these entities' strongest connection to many types of large investment businesses have been in Nantucket neighborhoods. Their only connection is profit. In contrast to the Citizens article, the planning board sponsored zoning article would codify and permanently legalize unrestricted short-term rentals island-wide without any guardrails to protect neighborhoods, zoning districts, or homes. Unfortunately, the unwritten consequences of the planning board's article would be to encourage the further expansion of commercial short-term rentals in neighborhoods. The planning board's article is a serious threat to the availability and affordability of year-round housing on the island, making it more difficult for teachers, firefighters, and healthcare workers and other members of our year-round community to continue to live and work here. It also continues to erode the character of local neighborhoods. This issue undeniably affects everyone who is part of the Nantucket community. The planning board is also proposing a number of articles to give homeowners more options to build year-round housing. This is great. There should be consideration made for preserving the year-round housing we already have. And this citizen's article for sensible short-term rentals is a way to help. I look forward to helping to advance an open and meaningful discussion on this balanced approach to protect Nantucket neighborhoods and housing, while continuing to support tourism and traditional vacation rentals on Nantucket. This has been an ongoing discussion with our community, and regardless of how you view this issue in the past, I invite everyone to give careful consideration to these important issues and to take a few minutes to read over this thoughtful article and consider supporting it at town meeting. And I also urge the planning board to forward a recommendation in favor of Citizens Article 43. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tobias. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I, through you, could just ask a couple questions on this.
Please.
Tobias, I just wanted to ask you about, in your accessory use, in the section that talks about residents may use their primary residence for short-term rentals. So does that mean the house, since we don't define that term, what does that mean, the house that they live in, or would that, is the intent here to not allow a secondary or a tertiary dwelling owned by a resident to be used for short-term rental?
The intent of the article, or through you, Chairman Iverson, the intent of the article is to be based on the parcel. So a individual will be allowed to short-term rent on that parcel.
Okay. So that if that is the intent, I think that term might need to be looked at. Because it's different in the resident is able to use their dwelling units. So again, when you use a different term, it suggests something different, that's all.
Yeah, essentially any party or primary.
Okay, so it's sort of, so what you wanted, like the next sentence under 2, it says non-residents may use their dwelling units. So would the idea be that residents may use their dwelling units? Sort of, is that the idea? Or the primary residence is what is somewhat problematic in this?
Could you ask it again, Andrew? Sorry.
Sure. So say the term you use in 1 and the term at the end refers to primary residence, right? So on a lot that has a primary residence and a secondary dwelling, the primary residence is occupied by the owner of the property, but the secondary dwelling is not the primary. Do you see what I'm saying? Because our terms are, the terms that we have are primary dwelling, secondary dwelling, tertiary dwelling.
Yeah, it's not a primary dwelling, it's a primary residence. So yes, so it's based on the parcel.
Okay, so the intent would be to be on the parcel, not the house.
That's correct.
In a multiple house situation. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. And I guess the other question is, in terms of determining whether a use is accessory or not, right now that determination comes from the building commissioner. And I'm just wondering why you would go directly to the zoning board of appeals on that. Typically what happens is if the building commissioner ruled, for example, that something was accessory and there was a disagreement, it could be appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I'm just wondering why this is structured to go directly to the ZBA for a special permit.
I think the intention here, Mr. Vorst, through you, Chairman Iverson, is to have a mechanism similar to what the board has discussed about being able to adjust some of these finer print issues, defining what is an accessory use through the ZBA process.
Okay, thank you.
So and then, Andrew, I just wanted to clarify a little bit more on your first question.
Sure.
On what defines like a primary residence. In my mind, it's like if you get your mail at One Rugged Road, that's your primary residence.
Mhm.
Even if you own Two Rugged Road, that's not your primary residence. Whether you live in the cottage, the shed, the guest house, it's all your primary residence.
Okay, so your intent was to cover the entire property, basically, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any board members? Any questions for Tobias or comments? Steve?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Tobias, thanks for coming in. Just along the lines of Andrew's comments and then a couple others. One of the things, it doesn't seem to codify in your proposal commercial dwelling units. So as to say an apartment in a commercial unit. By adding under the definition of short-term rental, any rental of a residential dwelling unit, I think that's potentially problematic. I don't have a particular problem in mind. I'm just looking at if this were to pass, where problems will arise. The other is, I think along the lines of primary residence, introducing a new term. I understand what you mean by it, but introducing a term other than is in the short-term rental definition, which would be dwelling unit, I think creates problems. And also, if this were to say residents may use their residential dwelling units, that seems more appropriate. And it also tracks what is in section 2 for non-residents, indicating that they may use their dwelling units as opposed to 1 residential dwelling units and 2 as opposed to a singular form as in the sentence for residents. So anyways, those are just some comments on technical aspects of it. Thank you.
Through you, Chairman Iverson, Stephen, the intent around the commercial versus residential aspects of the article you lay out is that this article very clearly lays out it's focused on residential. And so it basically says within commercial districts, short-term rentals are allowed within commercial districts. So that's in line with the town passed another regulation back in 2015 around transient residential facilities being allowed in commercial uses. And so it's designed to be in line with kind of more dense areas where a short-term rental would make more sense in line with a hotel.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can I add just one more comment on that?
Of course, yes.
I don't want to do it back and forth, and just because there's a lot of people in the queue. But it occurs to me, Tobias, along the lines of commercial, I'd read through this, but there are apartments that are in commercial buildings that I think are kind of in a gray area that this would affect. So I just think that's worthy of consideration.
So this article only applies to residential districts.
Okay,
As
so,
in-
so
So
you,
anything,
through you, Mr. Chair, to Andrew, are there any instances where a commercial a use through a prior non-conforming or through a variance or a special permit or some other function would have a commercial qualified building with a, say, a commercial garage with an apartment in it that would then be precluded from being able to be used as a short-term rental?
Well,
Just so rare that it's not significant.
yeah, the example that you gave, I think it would be covered because of the apartment would probably be the accessory use in that situation.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I guess the other point I'd make is I think there's making use the residential, the primary residences or residential units, dwellings, look at the singular and the plural for later, because I think that that's important given that many primary residences, if we're using that to mean the lot itself, have more than one dwelling, and it would just perhaps be housekeeping to have that be clear that it pertains to any of the dwelling units by indicating their plural nature. Thank you.
Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, just sorry, one follow-up question. So I just want to be clear on this. So this bylaw would not allow a short-term rental to be a principal use no matter who owned it. Isn't that correct? So if it doesn't, so the resident that owns the particular property is one situation, but a property that is owned by someone who lives on Nantucket, but its only use is short-term rental would be prohibited under this bylaw. Is that right?
Andrew, are you asking?
Yeah, I'm asking you, sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. More or less, yes.
Okay.
Leslie?
All right, and I just want to follow up and go back to the issue that I think Stephen was raising, which is the dwelling units located in commercial buildings. I mean, we have dwelling units located on the second and third floors in the commercial downtown district. We have them all over the Mid-Island in the CMI, probably in the CN, possibly even in the C-Tech. It seems to me like through reading this, those would not be allowed. So any dwelling units that are in commercial districts would not be allowed to be rented as a short-term rental. Was that your intention, Tobias?
No, that was not my intention. The article as written, and maybe I'll read for clarification. It's about an accessory use. So a short-term rental shall be permitted as an accessory use in all residential districts, R1, SR1, ROH, SOH, R5, R5L, R10, R10L, or SR10, R20, SR20, R40, VR, LUG1, LUG2, LUG3, and MMD. So the article has nothing to do with commercial districts. It's only addressing residential zoning.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think by not addressing the other districts, it effectively prohibits them.
Mm-hmm. It does.
All right, thank you.
That's
Go ahead, please, Tobias.
That's I don't believe that's the intention of the article.
Okay, thank you. Tobias, just to be really clear on this, could you, if a local owns a piece of property that is not their principal house, they will not going forward be allowed to rent it as a short-term rental. Is that correct?
Say that again, Dave.
If a local owns two properties, one's their principal residence, the other is their other property that they've traditionally short-term rented it, that will not be available to them going forward.
Yeah, so if I live at 1 Rugged Road and that's my primary residence, and I also own 2 Rugged Road, and 2 Rugged Road is strictly a short-term rental and is not a primary residence, then it would not be allowed. That would not be permissible. It would not be deemed accessory use. It's the focus is that being primary residence. It's a fair handshake for each parcel.
Okay, and one more question. In your special.
But Dave, to clarify, part of the intention of the article is to give some flexibility to determine that. So let's say Chairman Iverson, you owned 1 Rugged Road and 2 Rugged Road, and 1 was your primary residence, and 2, you short-term rent for a month in the summertime, but you housed a teacher for 9 months the rest of the year. Well, then in that case, the primary use would be residential. So in that context, there is some flexibility there.
But is that reflected in the article?
Yes. It's allowing the ZBA to determine exactly what it's a fair handshake. It's saying it's accessory uses to short-term rent. Is what activity happening on the residential property accessory or not?
Okay.
Seems kind of fair. The idea is just kind of be kind of fair,
I hear you. Great. Any other questions? Comments? All right, we're going to move to open up public comment here. Before I ask for a motion, though, I just want to reiterate, let's try to limit each person to a minute. Please be succinct. Please don't repeat. And please, most importantly, be respectful.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Tobias.
I'll be here in the background if anybody has any other questions.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this is for both 42 and 43. We're opening the public hearing for, correct?
I think we need a motion, correct?
Yeah.
No, just to close it.
Okay, great. Then here we go.
So I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations of last names. We have Gail Nishimura first, followed by Henry Sanford, then Bob and Virginia Vidoni. And we'll just continue to go in the order in which hands are raised.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Question is for the Article 43, where it says non-residents can get a special permit to rent as if it's determined to be accessory use. I'm assuming that follows the same definition as in Article 42, where if the owner occupied the house or dwelling for cumulatively 90 days, then any rental after that is accessory. And then the second part of the question is, how is it confirmed their occupancy for the 90 days or 3 months?
I'm sorry, Gail, are you directing this question to Tobias or?
To Tobias.
Okay.
So Gail, I'm going to repeat it back to you real quick. The question is, if you're a summer resident, are you allowed to short-term rent your property if you're primarily there as a residence, correct?
No, I'm wondering, is accessory use defined for the non-resident as the non-resident had at least 90 days of occupation cumulatively? Because I noticed that was defined as such for Article 42 when Andrew was talking.
Yeah, it is not defined. And it's not something I'm trying to answer. It's something I want us to come together as a community and through the ZBA process to give a fair handshake. In my determination, in my feeling, Gail, would be that if you came and stayed at your home for 3 weeks, you couldn't rent it out for 9 months because it's not its primary use as your residence. But if you were to come for 3 weeks, you could rent out for 3 weeks.
But if I rent it out 9 months to a teacher, that would make it a primary, according to your earlier example.
Exactly, correct.
Okay, thank you.
It's kind of, the goal is to try to be common sense. Like if it's primary being used as a residence, it's a residence, and you're allowed to short-term rent a bit. But it's kind of like a fair handshake. It's an old school Nantucket way of doing it, you know?
Okay, so we have Henry Sanford, followed by Bob in Virginia.
Hello.
Hello, Henry.
Hear ya.
I don't think I have my video, but I'll just go ahead. So I just want to follow up on the conversation that we're having right now, because our family, and I think plenty of local families, have multiple properties that they use to rent and build, essentially, I'll call it middle class equity. But what I want to follow up on is a dwelling whose only use could be short-term rentals. So we give this example of the teacher right now. However, there are pockets of uninsulated, I'll call them cottages, Smith's Point, Codfish Park, Quidnet, Walwinet, most of the downtown wharves that are not suitable for year-round housing in any way, really. I mean, some of them just straight up aren't safe. So how do you reconcile these two ideas of saying, well, you can short-term rent it if you do it, long-term to the teacher, but like no one's going to put a teacher in an uninsulated cottage on Old North Wharf, they would have, had to evacuate last weekend. So I just don't, when, this whole fair handshake, all that, like, it seems to me, honestly, like just a ton of gray area. And I think this is just too complex of an issue to like be casual about. I mean, we're talking about a family heirloom for a lot of people. Think about people out on Smith's Point. That's almost a predominant summer community. I don't understand the common sense there. So maybe someone could answer that of how do you determine its primary use in consideration of places that were built, again, as I just exampled, Walwinet, on the Hallover, Codfish Park, I would say Quidnet Village, Smith's Point, and then again, the town wharves, where my interests lay. Those were never intended as year-round resident areas. So I just want to understand the logic behind that and that definition. Rugged Road is an easy definition. That's obviously a year-round place, but 8 New Jersey Avenue, which could not be there later on this year, on a bad nor'easter, is not. So I just like more clarification on where they're coming at with that.
Yeah. I'll through you,
Henry.
Chairman Iverson. I'm a huge, first of all, I'll say I'm really passionate about climate change, but we can't deal with climate change until we have housing. And so in the context of, let's just say, the commercial wharf area, downtown, those uninsulated, shacks, Henry, you described, those cottages, those are in commercial areas. So those would be allowed to short-term rent because they're commercial use. And then the context of
well, we're an ROH actually. So Old North Wharf is an ROH, but anyways.
Henry, let him finish his thought, please.
And then the idea is for, a small, let's just say a shack out in Nantucket that's uninsulated, you would have to stay there for 3 weeks, and then you could rent out for 3 weeks, because your primary use is to stay there because you own it. So that's the intention.
You do realize that okay, I'm sorry. I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry.
Okay, so we have Bob in Virginia, Vidoni, followed by Edward Sanford.
Hello, thank you all for your time and the opportunity to ask some questions. I am struggling for a little clarification around grandfathered or pre-existing legal uses. And I guess towards legal, I thought I heard the concept was that under the general bylaws, it would be much easier to regulate or prohibit short-term rentals than under the zoning laws. And example would be if the Board of Health determined that short-term rentals are a health hazard to island residents, could they then propose a regulation against all short-term rentals, regardless of legal pre-existing zoning uses? That's the question.
Is this for Robin, Bob?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Robin, did you hear that?
Yes, would you want me to address that?
Please.
So, again, as I've said, it's difficult to talk in hypotheticals. You need to have, reasonable and rational bases for regulation. In my opinion, I think that it would probably be subject to challenge if the Board of Health declared short-term rentals a public health hazard and tried to prohibit them specifically. But to address the question generally, in the concept of zoning, if a use is lawfully in existence right now and zoning is amended in the future to prohibit that use will be permitted to continue as it's currently being used. That's its lawful non-conforming status. It's lawful now, it exists, and it is in use. It's protected if zoning changes in the future to prohibit the use. On the general bylaw side, how the uses are regulated, if those bylaws change, then in many instances, they will apply going forward. And so you don't have the same kind of lawful protected existing status when it comes to changes to general bylaws that you do for zoning bylaws. You have more flexibility to regulate kind of the how of the use as opposed to the what of the use as time changes and needs change and experience changes.
Great.
Okay, thank you. So just,
Bob,
yes.
just to be clear on this is that until they're legalized at some level, there is no pre-existing non-conforming. They can't be grandfathered until they're legal.
That's very important. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, that helps.
That's very
Well,
helpful.
I will say,
Robin?
Andrew, perhaps can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the building inspector's current interpretation of the zoning bylaws that they are allowed.
It's correct, but I think that it's important to note that there was one lawsuit against so the building inspector has made that determination twice. The zoning board has upheld his determination twice. There was a lawsuit the first time citing the Styler case, which eventually was dismissed, I believe. And the second time is still, the decision stands by the ZBA, but it is potentially subject to further appeal. So I think the concern, and some of this has been expressed during our meetings, is that, and I believe this is correct, is that Mr. Styler argued that his use was grandfathered, and the court in that case ruled that it was in fact an illegal use, so it did not have that protection. Now, what's important to remember is the Linfield bylaw versus our bylaw are quite different. There's a large footnote in the Styler decision that says the outcomes could be different depending on your zoning. But it is true that our zoning has a provision, which is the definition of principal use, that talks about uses expressly defined in the bylaw. And I think it's also important for the board to remember, even though obviously 2-week rentals or rentals less than 30 days have been around for a long, long time, legislation defining them and everything is all very new. The legislation for the taxation or the collection of revenue didn't come about until the end of 2018, really 2019. And the Styler case was just decided by the SJC in June of 2021. So this is all very new. Before this time, short-term rentals as a separate use were not defined. They were not, there was no enabling laws or anything that basically said you could necessarily restrict that use.
Yeah.
Bob, you good, or you have some more?
No, thank you very much. It's a
Thank
learning
you very much,
experience.
Bob.
Okay, so we have Edward Sanford, followed by Kathy Baird, and then Melissa Philbrick. So Edward, you are up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Just one quick comment on the in the definition section. Tobias has said a duration of less than 30 days. I think that definition should be consistent with the state definition, which is less than 32 days, I think. Just my 2 cents on that. It seems, and I don't know if it's been answered, and I don't know who I'm directing this to, but I want to get onto the issue of grandfathering. And maybe the first question is to Tobias through the chair. In your opinion, does this article, are current short-term rentals grandfathered and therefore exempt from this article? And once you answer, maybe town council or Andrew or Leslie or somebody else can weigh in.
Thank you, Edward. Tobias?
I'll let town council give a shot at it first.
Okay. Robin, please.
Again, like I just said, it's my understanding that the building commissioner interprets the bylaw as currently allowing these uses. I think Andrew just spoke to the issue, so I don't know that we have anything to add. And Andrew, if you want to jump in, obviously it's not my call as town council. That's my understanding of how it's being interpreted by your zoning enforcement officer. But I don't know if Andrew has anything else he wants to add beyond his comments on the Siler case.
The only thing, and Robin, I'm just wondering, so in the event that an appeal goes to the state and the state rules that if the state were to rule, for example, that the principles underlying the Styler case applied to Nantucket, then any of those uses would not have the protection of being thought of as pre-existing non-conforming. Wouldn't that be right?
Yeah. The court determines that the uses are not currently allowed, then they would be subject to a change. If a court agrees with the building commissioner that the uses are currently allowed, the ones that are in existence would be protected from a zoning change.
Right. And so absent an actual definition, which the zoning bylaw doesn't have right now, the legality of this really turns on the interpretation of the building commissioner and the sort of the opinion of the majority of the ZBA at this point.
Well,
absent a specific definition in the bylaw, right?
Yeah, the building commissioner interprets the bylaw, and if something like that interpretation, they can ask the ZBA to review it. And then ultimately, if they're not pleased with the ZBA's result, they can take it to a court and have it determined there. That's the process.
Right. So the decision about whether something is legally grandfathered or not is really subject now to an interpretation by a single person, the building commissioner, followed up by a potential appeal to the ZBA, as opposed to a written definition in the bylaw that everyone can look at and agree to, right?
Yeah, if you were to amend the bylaw to be clear, it would, take that uncertainty, that risk of litigation off the table.
Right.
Can I does Article 42 do that if it was passed?
Are you asking me or
Whomever, yeah.
Andrew, do you want to speak to that issue?
Sure, I think it does do that. That's the intent of it. And it's, again, it identifies all of the situations, all of the particular types of units. And I think that's important. It doesn't differentiate between zoning districts at this time.
Okay, I guess, well, one last question. I think I would address this to town council. This Article 43, I don't know what quite the right word is. I just use discriminates based on ownership, i.e. a resident owner has greater rights under this zoning article than a non-resident does. Is that something that is allowed in Massachusetts in zoning law?
You know, I could see there being potential issues with it. I can't say what the Attorney General, you know, will or won't do in reviewing this, or a court if it was challenged. You know, just listening to the discussion today, I don't know that how it's being described and how it's written are the same. And so I think it would need some further study, but I could see a potential, you know, for a challenge there. What might come from it, I can't predict.
Okay, and I guess, all right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's something that could be flagged by the Attorney General, but
Okay,
so again, this whole area of law is so new that
right.
we're
Very
all
vague.
figuring
Got
it
it.
out.
Well, I guess I'll direct my
Right.
my first question to Tobias again about grandfathering. Is it your opinion, or the folks that have worked with you on this article, your all's opinion that about the grandfathering, whether current short-term rentals would be exempt from this article or not?
So I'll try to answer your question in the clearest way I can, which is that this article does not try to grandfather anything specifically or allow uses by right specifically. What it does is, and I'll answer it another way. Let's say, like, I currently don't short-term rent at my parcel. Now, tomorrow, if I started short-term renting, then when the Article 42 were to pass, I would have a pre-existing use, and depending on if Article 42 were to pass and how the health department viewed it, I would essentially be grandfathered. But the beauty of this article is it's trying to give a fair handshake and not prevent those in the future who might want to short-term rent, but it's also not trying to specifically penalize those who have short-term rented their primary residence under residential zoning under an accessory use from doing that. I can't give you the best answer, but
Well, yeah, I think you did. Thank you. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Edward.
Okay, so we have Kathy Baird, followed by Melissa Philbrook, and then Robin Knights.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. First, I wanted to, I'm Kathy Baird. I have a house out in Tom Nevers that I've had since 1993. Been short-term renting it when I lost my job in 2015. But I don't live there. I come to the island probably 2 to 3 months a year, but it's spread out through the entire year. So I'm there every month. I'll be there in 2 weeks. So I want to just applaud the town on taking a stand here and taking a proactive stance on the issue and writing a potential bylaw to codify the traditional uses and setting up a framework for regulation. And I think that the idea that it's been set up without any specific regulations in it, that general bylaw that we're talking about, is good, because I think the town has acknowledged there really isn't enough data, quantifiable data, to make a decision about what needs to be regulated. And you really shouldn't regulate something that you don't know is a problem. So you need to identify that it is or that it isn't first, and then you can regulate it properly and fairly. And also it would give them, the town, I think the intent was, the way I read it, was that there's going to be this registration process would collect data and document nuisance situations. So then I get, I'm waiting to see what that would look like. And I think that that would be a good idea. Regulation is a nightmare in terms of paperwork and having to deal with more bureaucracy. But if that's what it needs to happen, that's fine. I guess the question I have is for Tobias on his article. So I would direct the question through the chair to him. Just reading what it says at the very end of the article, it says, and I'm quoting, "The purpose of this article is to protect Nantucket homeowners while also seeking to protect our neighborhoods and housing. We can do that by helping to manage and sustain economic growth and honor our tourism tradition by preserving our community's character." So that's kind of motherhood and apple pie. Nobody could ever say, well, we just don't want to do that. My question is, what's the data? What's the information? What are you basing this particular bylaw on? And how does it achieve that goal? How does it discourage what appears to be, investor-owned STRs, or how does it not harm a lot of people, I guess is the question, because there's no data to support that I can see anywhere that supports that taking this action in Article 43 will achieve the goal that's stated at the end. Can you tell me how the cause and effect relationship here and how that works, Tobias?
Thank you, Kathy. Through you, Mr. Iverson, the intention of the article is to focus on residential zoning and allow short-term rentals as an accessory use. In regards to data, there is, in the housing needs assessment, there is a significant number of homes that have transitioned from year-round housing stock to summer homes or short-term rentals. And I'd encourage you to review that. That's stated in 2012, and then there was an update in 2016. Anecdotally, it's very hard to find any place to live here. So I would hope, the intention of this article is to encourage summer folks who rent their places to come spend a little more time here and rent out, and also create a mechanism so that in the future, more homes are not turned into short-term rentals, but those who have been, like yourself, renting out short-term, I believe would be able to continue to do so under the article I've proposed here.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Tobias, I'm actually very familiar with the data that you cited. And I do know for a fact that data stated that the conversions or the year-round housing moving to a non-year-round housing status was identified in the federal government's statistics as moving to a vacant status. So that includes not only short-term rentals, but it includes homes that are bought by people who don't rent them. They just stay empty. They're seasonal residents.
Exactly, yeah.
And considered. So to say it's all short-term rentals is really not fair or not true, because it's just vacant. You have no idea, and neither does the federal government, how much of that is vacant and how much of it is short-term rental. In fact, it's not available for long-term housing, year-round housing, but please don't use that. We need more data, because that doesn't show how this article would increase the availability of affordable housing. I mean, affordable housing, a lot of those homes are very high-end homes that are rented out. I don't think those would be available for affordable housing. So that's my questions. Please we need more information, and I'm hoping that you will get it to be able to support your goals and show how we get from point A to point B. That would be really helpful. Nobody will quibble with the fact that those are stated goals. The question is, how do you get there, and what's the data that supports how you get there? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is there is a conversion from year-round to not year-round. Some of that short-term, some of that is seasonal. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, so we have Melissa Philbrick, followed by Robin Nides, and then Brooke Moore.
Hi, it's Melissa. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
It's wonderful to see all you people. And I haven't seen you very often anymore. I'm speaking as an individual, not for any of the organizations that I once were was part of or anything. It's just me. I would applaud the article about in the general bylaw that sets up a procedure through the Board of Health to adopt regulations. I think that's a great idea, and I think it's the right way to go. I wanted to just, I think, reiterate the kinds of things that people have already said about how I really believe there's a need to regulate short-term rentals. I've seen it deteriorate my neighborhood. I've seen year-round housing stock go to short-term rental. So I just feel strongly personally that there is something wrong and it's radically changed with the online rental agencies. It's not the way it's been in the past. But and I think the planning board and everyone on the island is really focusing on how can we create incentives for other properties to be rented year round. And I hope that this regulation doesn't undermine that, but I fear it will. My suggestion to the planning board is you consider and I don't have numbered articles, but the one that's proposed by the planning board, that you consider using the phrase that already exists in our bylaw of owner occupied, and in the definition of short-term rentals, say that what's allowed as of right are on owner occupied residential properties would be short-term rentals, rather than just make it a blanket approval. But I guess I also have a question on the grandfathering of uses, and maybe this is for Andrew and maybe this is for town council, but I think I heard earlier in this evening's conversation that one way to deal with the grandfathering issue, which I think is just a hornet's nest out there, is if the planning board, if we were to adopt a definition of short-term rentals that clearly makes it legal in year one, if we were to then in year two restrict that short-term rental to a certain number of days under the zoning code or anywhere, that would apply across the board regardless of prior practice and prior existing use. Is that correct?
Andrew, did you want me to, or the chair, would you like me to address that, or were you going to speak to it?
Whatever, either one would be fine.
But, Mr. Chair, if I could just start, I think that the point of the definition that the board in the board's article is that it from the research that we have, and again, we don't have a lot of data. We have basically some information from the state, which we've determined. I mean, and I think we've shown you this in the mapping, that these particular units exist all across the island in all kinds of zoning districts everywhere. So in year one, as Melissa said, our definition would basically provide, I think, the legal date. So any use that was legally in operation, at least prior to that, and then established over the course of the coming year, if in fact a subsequent article was brought to a future town meeting, say in year two, which said maybe there's some zoning districts that the uses aren't allowed, or maybe there's a cap of the uses, based somewhere around the number that exists right now. But again, we don't have reliable information on any of that right now. But I think that when I hear the zoning is changing and forevermore, we're stuck with it, I don't think you should. You as on the planning board know better than anyone that that's not really the case. That there's a good reason to basically introduce the definition that we have, is that there is legal jeopardy around the issue of grandfathering and around whether the uses are properly established or not. That's the basic case of the appeals, and it's the basic principle behind the original Styler decision. Maybe Robin has something to add on that, but.
So, I think I can, or at least I would like to just clarify again, under zoning, if a use is lawfully being made and zoning changes in a way that implicates that use, it's going to retain its ability to continue to lawfully be used. And I think that's just the thing to keep in mind. So if you adopt Article 42 and you clarify what is now lawful, and somebody is not using their property for short-term rental, and there's a change made in the future, they'll be subject to that change.
So
if they'll be protected from.
right. So I think I understand, and I thank you both for the explanation. So nothing in Article 42 wipes out grandfathering, regardless, if it were to be adopted.
You couldn't. So the protections afforded to lawfully existing uses come from state law, from the Zoning Act.
So the only way that the existing behaviors can continue, could be considered not pre-existing, would be for a court to overturn the building inspector.
Generally, yes.
Or the building inspector to change his mind, or the ZBA to overrule the zoning.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I still would argue for it being, if we're going to allow it, it should be for owner occupied. But I thank you for the clarification on the grandfathering.
Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, we have Robin Nides, followed by Brooke Moore, and then Bob Carkman.
Hi there. Can you, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make a couple of observations. The first is that with all due respect, I disagree with the prior speaker. The definition of owner occupied it is typically 3 months. That would have the effect of eliminating approximately 85% of short-term rentals, as very few seasonal owners, due to job and family commitments, can stay 3 months. And that includes even seasonal owners who don't rent. 3 months is too long of a hurdle for the overwhelming majority. From the view of much of the public, the Article 42-43 debate appears to be a relitigation of Article 90, especially when you read some of the emails in the planning packet. And I think what many of us feel is the planning department under Andrew has done a commendable job of trying to move on from Article 90 and to recognize the historic use of short-term rentals. And what Article 42 really does is it presents an elegant, flexible, ongoing framework which allows future regulation as the town sees fit. And many of us feel 43 is just a distraction, which presents ambiguity, regulatory hurdles, and a lot of legal risk for the town and seasonal owners. So we would urge the planning board to please not be distracted because what planning has presented in 42 is really an elegant, flexible solution for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay, Brooke, followed by Bob Carkman, and then Stephen Lineback.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having a hard time understanding the intersection of the regulatory bylaw with the blanket codification of short-term rentals. in that, let me ask this in one way, and maybe this is a question for town council. How far out of the scope of nuisance what would be allowed under that regulatory bylaw as it's written? Because it very clearly defines nuisance. I mean, it describes this as a nuisance bylaw. And I guess what I'm getting at is if the Board of Health or our community determines that the balance of short-term rentals against the number of dwellings that can be occupied by people who live and work here and provide service to our visitors is askew, and we want to bring that into balance through that regulatory framework. How far out of the term nuisance would the Board of Health be allowed to go? And I include that in the number of days. Is that an argument that provides a justifiable standard that would justify a number of days or resident versus non-resident short-term rental practice? Does my question make sense?
I will let town council.
So just not to steal their thunder, but could I just add something here on that?
Sure.
Yes, Andrew.
So I think that beyond the nuisance issue, Chapter 337 of the Acts of 2018 included some very specific language of regulations that the municipalities can put in place. And we talked about that at the beginning, and I'm going to go over those just a bit here, that the existence of or location of operators, regulating the class of operators, the number of days a person may operate in a calendar year, license or registration different from the state process, no outstanding enforcement actions, allowing for inspections. And I would add that what we have talked about in terms of inspections, again, we don't have a Board of Health staff that can go and inspect 1,800 homes here. That was intended to be on a complaint type basis. Penalties for violation and setting a reasonable fee. So those were the provisions that I think a general bylaw can address, in addition to the normal nuisance things that are outlined in the 39.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, that's something that we talked with both Robin and John Giorgio about, that like has to be rational basis for any of that. One thing I want to caution on reasonable fees is that fees need to cover the cost of operating the program. Fees aren't there to just generate whatever the market will bear. And we have, at least our potential focus was a reasonable, not an excessive fee and not excessive bureaucracy around this.
Robin, do you have more to add?
No, I don't. I think Andrew covered that.
Brooke, did that answer that for you?
Yeah, but I have a follow-up, which
That's
is
fine.
Article 42 seeks to so as I understand it, and this may be repetitive, but I'm asking for clarification. In theory, the regulatory framework can impose restrictions on short-term rentals that would apply across the board regardless of their having been codified by Article 42. And they would take effect immediately, and there would be no grandfathering if it comes through that framework?
Within the scope of regulating the form of the use, as opposed to the location of the use, the basic use components. That's kind of where are you regulating the functionality, the how of the use, as opposed to the where it can just be of the use.
Okay. And my concern, and I think some of it's been alleviated by this question of the intersection of the regulatory framework with the zoning bylaw. One of my concerns is that by codifying it before the regulations are in place, it might create a perverse incentive to accelerate the acquisition of properties and putting them into short-term rental use to protect the right to continue to do so long-term. In the gap between the passage of the framework and the creation of the actual regulations that might limit the volume of short-term rentals on Nantucket overall in order to achieve this balance of housing that I think about. Does that, I think there's a question in there. Have I understood that correctly? That like if you make it legal and then buying it and putting it in short-term rental protects it as a grandfathered use, then we're creating an incentive for people to snap up a lot of real estate in the short term.
If I may, Brooke, isn't that a risk that we take with everything we try to regulate on this island? We've seen it with pools, we've seen it with other things. I mean, I just think, and I appreciate that fear, it's real, but I think we've seen it in every corner that we try to regulate. And I'm sorry, Andrew?
Mr. Chairman, I understand that. I definitely understand that concern, especially if there was an extensive gap in between. But I think what we're trying to get to is, again, supporting the articles that have been put forward. And between now and May, we would, again, with a clear direction that there is support for that, we would work to have the regulations, in effect as soon as we can. Looking towards this May date that the zoning would be voted on. And perhaps if there was support, there might be a way to change the date that the zoning bylaw becomes effective, which is something we could certainly consider.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Please, Brooke.
I'm going to be completely honest in my feeling about this. The uncertainty of the Styler decision and its impact on Nantucket actually provides an incentive for our community to come together and agree on reasonable regulations and controls on short-term rentals for our community's future. And my fear is that Article 42 then creates a disincentive for folks to come to the table and say, what do we want for our future? Because that use is then protected and codified. And I think that is the crossroads we're at as a community, presented to us by the Styler decision. And I just hate to rush this codification forward. Because it's hard to know the impact, of more of this. I mean, I think I can see it, but anyway, as a housing advocate, it just has me very, very worried. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Okay, so we have Bob Cargman, followed by Stephen Lineback, and then Rick Atherton. Bob, you have to unmute.
Can you all hear me?
Yep, now we can.
Oh, thank you, thank you. My name is Bob Cargman. We have a home at 8 Mill. We have been seasonal residents for the past 35 years. My question goes to is really about process and urgency, and it really Brooke raised the question just before me. What I've heard today is this whole area is very new and very complex. We need more data about STRs and their impacts in various districts. We have no reliable information. Is there a problem, or are there problems that need to be regulated? What is grandfathered, what is not? should we put this in the general bylaw or the zoning bylaw? What about grandfathering and pre-existing uses, primary, secondary, tertiary residence versus accessory uses? Tremendous, really wonderful questions, all of which deserve a really hard look for people who are sincerely concerned about both sides of this issue. One being the protection, the essential protection of residents who rely on this kind of income, to live, and this new phenomenon which has arisen of investor groups, really not just in Nantucket but everywhere, and destroying what was a valued resource by overdoing a good thing over time. So my question is a question of what's the urgency? The Styler case, if there were to be a case in Nantucket similar to the Styler case, that would be 3 to 4 years before it would be resolved by the SJC. So if somebody were to file a case in Nantucket identical to Styler with the same and raise the issues in the same fashion, that's 3 or 4 years away. So that's not there. There's no urgency from that. We have the building inspector whose interpretations are very favorable to residents. So that all would have to be challenged. So I don't see the tremendous pressure to get something passed by May, where we have so many issues. Just to requote, this whole area is very new, very complex. We need more data about STRs in various districts. If those are the facts, why not, really have various committees, various tasks assigned, and struggle with these two huge problems. One is protecting existing residents who rely on this income, and two is protecting the island's future from an exploitation of something that should not be exploited. Why the rush?
Is that a question, Bob?
That's the question. Why the rush? Why can't we study this issue as it needs to be studied when the chairman said we need more data about SDRs in various districts and their impacts, and we have no reliable information? Why do we need to move ahead now? Is it 42 or is it 43? Why do we have to? Why can't we have a 42 and a 43 and a 44, all of which get massaged, and we address all of the problems in a full vetted way? Why are we rushing to a May town meeting, especially where Brooke says there's so many unintended consequences which can arise? Why are we rushing?
Bob, in some senses, I agree with you, but also at this point, we've had 2 people sued about how they use their property. And until we deal with it, that could very well continue on, which isn't a great position for any homeowner to be in. But and maybe Andrew has a better answer than that. But I think we need to start down the road, in my personal opinion.
Well, I think that forming committees, let's say, for instance, I live in the old historic district. Next to us are 8 lots where people have planned 8 to 10 bedroom homes between the main house and accessory structures, and they're pushing to have spas and or spas of over 1,000 gallons, which is a swimming pool, and they multiple 1 or 2 owners, which are a syndicate. They own 3 or 4 lots. We see that as a threat to us. We see them headed towards the short-term rental exploitation of those lots. We don't see 8, 9, and 10 bedroom houses being a normal thing that's being developed on Nantucket, that families are developing. but these are all moving through the permitting process as we speak. Why are we saying, okay, 42 would allow those people to move ahead, or 43 wouldn't? There is so much data that we need to develop. Perhaps the old historic district is a place that it should be prohibited. That would be my view from a very self-interested point of view. But what I'm saying is there is so much to grapple with. Let's grapple.
Agreed, but we're trying to put in the regulatory framework to deal with that. I mean, that's what this is about, is to get in place a regulatory process in which those concerns can be addressed. Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, I just, again, we went through a very contentious town meeting last year on this topic. And I believe that in government, there's problems that have been identified and we need to move forward to address them. And it may take several years in order to do that. But the article that we have advanced here sets that framework and sets basically ends this speculation about whether they're grandfathered or not. And I don't believe that question was really answered. I think that is lurking out there. And again, I personally feel for people, for individual property owners that have to, find themselves in the middle of this, having to defend what they started, I think probably, not thinking they were doing anything wrong. I think they started this probably on property that they, and I think some of the letters support that they feel very strongly about and are, in some cases stretching to be here. So I don't think that leaving this in limbo is a responsible action for the board. If you all do, that's fine. But just remember that as of now, there is no restriction whatsoever. The town has no idea who is starting a short-term rental or what they're doing or anything. And, maybe that's something that people feel the town doesn't have to be involved with. But this, what we've proposed, I think, is sort of, a midpoint between some of those views. But if
how do we prevent investor syndicates from buying up single-family homes to create short-term hotels? In my neighborhood, we know there's 8 properties moving ahead with that exact intent. They're investor groups. They want to, this is their permanent business. And why doesn't 42 just open the floodgates to them, which is exactly the wrong intention, I hope.
Mr. Chairman, could I just state that if you think floodgates are open, the floodgates are already open. There's no restriction whatsoever on establishing short-term rentals. And I think for future ideas, we've talked about defining hotels and guest houses in a way that would put limits on that. And I believe, I think it's 25%, at least based on the data that I have from the state, of the old historic district is involved in some sort of short-term rental right now. And through the general bylaw, I think there's an opportunity to potentially put caps on that. So that I don't think is available through the zoning bylaw. So I don't agree that it opens any floodgates. I agree that I understand that there's concern about it, but I don't believe it opens any floodgates because there is no regulation on it right now.
Thank you. Bob, we need to wrap up. We've got 10 more guys behind you with their hands up. Are you satisfied?
Well, I just feel that between now and May, we could, and I'd be happy, we could get a lot more data. We could help. We don't need to dump this on the Board of Health, just delegate it. I think, it could be grappled with much more granularity. And I'm just worried that, shoveling off these issues to here or there rather than getting more citizen involvement. Mr. Glidden did an amazing job of trying to address these issues. And, some people worry about this or that as part of his warrant. And I'm saying that the answers lie between 42, 43, and a 44. What I'm saying is that we should be grappling between now and May with all these issues and perhaps not just trying to move them off to the Board of Health.
Thank you, Bob. Tobias, I'm going to hold off on you unless you're directly asked a question. We're backed up with questions right now, if that's all right. Thanks. Who do we have next, Meg?
Okay, so we have Stephen Leinbach followed by Rick Atherton and then John Kitchener.
Hi, just a couple quick questions. Just trying to get my head wrapped around this grandfather thing in Article 42, and maybe this question is for Andrew. If Article 42 passes now as written, does that mean that every house, every residence on Nantucket is grandfathered to be used as a short-term rental, whether it's registered with the town or the state as of now?
That was a question for Andrew, right, Steve?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So it doesn't, the grandfathering has to be use. The property has to be in use for short-term rental. So it would be at the time of the vote. Basically, the use becomes allowed by right. There would have to be a licensing process to register the short-term rental. And it is a legal use just as it is right now. So grandfathering doesn't come in under 42 unless the bylaw is changed in the future.
Okay, so what would be, let's say, the date of record then? So if it's changed in year 2, is it changed at the date in year 2? I mean, what I'm getting at is, certain properties are family generational properties that aren't being short-term rented now, but the next generation might have to in order to hang on to it with increasing costs and taxes and everything else on Nantucket. So how are the future generations protected for legacy properties?
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, that's the reason that we don't believe that it should be in zoning, that the use should be allowed, but that if it were regulated in a general bylaw, let's say, a general bylaw established a cap or something. It's not property specific. It would be number specific in a general area or however you're defining it. So it would mean that it wouldn't be the current property that is grandfathered. In that scenario, there would be other opportunities to do it, provided there were available licenses.
Okay, so it would be a cap on the number. Let's just say they decide to limit the number and there's so many in an area.
Yep.
So technically, the next question then is technically what makes that a pre-existing use? Is that just that you're registered with the regulatory body, or do you have to prove income from use in the past?
There's not a zoning, unless there was a zoning change, there's no grandfathered issue at that point. It would be a licensing issue at that point. So grandfathering doesn't kick in under that scenario. I think there's the issue right now is that there is not a specific allowance in the bylaw now. So it means uses that started don't have clear grandfather positions as we move forward. Article 42 would say effective the date of our vote, or if the planning board chose a future date, would mean that any use that was, any use that was occurring is now legal, and that any use that is subject to the registration would become legal.
Okay.
And grandfathering would mean in the future that, say someone said, okay, now we're going to prohibit them in year 2. So they were made legal in year 1, and now someone says we're going to prohibit them. That if it's done through zoning anyway, the analysis would be back to the individual property. So it would enrich some properties and lock some other properties out.
Okay, I think that clarifies enough for me, and for brevity's sake, I'll allow the process to move on. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Great. Rick Atherton, you're up next, followed by John Kitchener and then Georgia Raismond.
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Great. Mr. Chair, thanks for allowing me to speak. I'd like to just make a sort of a general observation of what might be a likely outcome, and this has been alluded to previously. If the planning board moves to recommend the Article 42 and against 43, and our finance committee moves to recommend Article 42 and against 43, and the planning board does the same, and the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission does the same. So it'll be left up to town meeting under those circumstances. And I'm certainly hopeful that Article 42 is defeated. But if it isn't, I think the clear-cut implication for our realtor and our investor friends is that we're open and welcoming short-term rental and investor real estate. And I continue to have a concern on the conversion of our housing stock from year-round uses, be they rental or owner-occupied, to purely investor-related, monetarily incentivized investment assets. And I think that's a mistake. And therefore, I would recommend we wait on Article 42. I've said before, it's premature. Andrew indicated we could have a start date of 42, 2 years out. At the very minimum, the planning board should consider that option. I hope you'll decide not to proceed and wait till the effective regulations under the authority granted by the state are determined in advance. Otherwise, the experience of the Board of Health dealing with this, I gotta be very frank, are difficult and hard to understand how they'll be effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, we have John Kitchener, followed by Georgia Raismond, and then Galen Gardner. John, we can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Yes.
sure can.
Okay. Oh, first of all, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd just like to take a minute or two, not on the rights and wrongs of either articles, but, we've heard from a lot of people on both sides this evening about the lack of data. And I think, first of all, I'm a year-round resident and a registered voter. And as a voter, I do feel like I do not understand the ins and outs of these articles as well as I should, because there is not enough data for me to form an opinion. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, this island spawned one of the most successful data mining companies in the country, Nantucket Data Platform. And Alan Worden and his team, and this is not a commercial ad for that organization, but we know that that organization have extremely talented people that can extract data that we never would have imagined. We all saw what they came up with 3 or 4 years ago. So, given the fact that we have a lack of data, and yet we have a local organization that is a national leader in getting data, and anyone who's had anything to do with that organization know that they are very good at getting people to understand, first of all, what are the right questions? We say we don't have data, but what are the right questions, and what data do we really need to answer those questions? So I kind of feel like we have a data problem, but we have a company on the island of people that know how to get us that data. So I guess my suggestion would be, or comment would be, to through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Vorse, perhaps to Mr. Sanford and Mr. Glidden, couldn't we, even though we only have 3 months left, couldn't we ask the Nantucket data platform to get involved and get us at least the basic data that would help us all understand the situation a little better, and therefore be able to make a more informed decision when we're at the town meeting on May 2nd. So that's my comment, and that's my question to either the planning board or Mr. Vorse or whoever. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Andrew, would you like to take that up?
The data situation, I think, is one of the reasons behind the registration, the need for the local registration. Not sure what data. I think there's certainly some data, and there are companies out there that do this, that mine through the VRBO rentals and some of that. I think, the Board of Health, at least the Board of Health director is, offered to be the person to lead this effort. So it's not like they're getting something dumped on them. It's something that he believes belongs in his wheelhouse and that he can do. Part of what the intent here and is in their budget is additional staff, and at least the idea for a contract with one of these companies to help with the enforcement, the long-term enforcement. There's still, I think, again, we've heard, oh, it's, multinationals or this or that. And, I've done a very rough look at like the R10 area, and, found some people that I know to talk to them about how they use their short-term rentals. And that's the kind of data we're sort of looking for to get a really true picture of this. I don't know, again, that we need to wait on this. And I think Mr. Atherton said that we would put it to 2 years out. We wouldn't ever put it out beyond another town meeting. So the point would be that, it would become effective when the Board of Health finishes, or a date certain or something like that would be the idea. So, but I think the point is we want to get on with it here and address the issue and not leave things in their current state, which is very uncertain.
Thank you. Tobias, did you want to weigh in on that? I saw you pop up.
Yeah, I'll be just very brief. I just wanted to provide a little information. For the Neighborhood First program, I really dug into this. This was back in 2019, 2018. And, through the planning board support, the town appropriated $20 million to buy properties so that we wouldn't have more 40Bs and have more development. And so I looked at all the properties that were sold in 2018 for less than $2 million. And then I cross-referenced that with VRBO, Airbnb data. And there was a very clear trend, which is a third of all properties that were sold in 2018 that were, not land, obviously, like pre-existing homes, shifted. A third went from year-rounder to year-rounder, a third went from year-rounder to summer resident, and a third went from year-round to short-term rental. So that's just anecdotal, and I'd be happy to share more information with maybe a joint session with the planning board in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. John, we're going to move on. You satisfied?
Just one last quick comment. I think with data, this situation is so polarized. It would be good to have an independent source, which I think someone like the data platform could provide. And I do think they could provide it before the town meeting. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John.
Okay, we have Georgia Raisman, followed by Galen Gardner, and then Gary Beller.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you all for the attention and care you are giving this issue. It's a very important issue, and I'm glad we're finally dealing with short-term rentals. They're a critical element in the housing and the just the general atmosphere on Nantucket in the last couple of years. First thing I'd like to say is, with regard to zoning, we all, I think, expect to live in a neighborhood, not in a business area. I think that is what prompted the two litigations that have taken place because of short-term rentals in residential areas. Article 42, in my mind, makes the entire island a potential business area, not a neighborhood. And one of the issues of finding, as one of the people who wrote into the planning board noted, finding beer cans and empty bottles and miscellaneous pieces of garbage are things that result when you have an absentee off-island owner of a house that doesn't care about who's there, and they don't care about who's there for their 5-day stay. I think regulating a short-term rental in the form that Article 43 does is an attempt to deal with that kind of off-island owner, and I think we should very much try to do it through Article 43 rather than 42, which doesn't seem to distinguish, it doesn't distinguish at all among off-island and residential owners. Secondly, I think in terms of housing, Nantucket as a resort is such an attractive place that all residential areas are very attractive as investment short-term rentals. I remember somebody standing up at town meeting last year and saying, nobody wants to live in nobody wants to stay anywhere but the cliff. Well, we all know that's not true. As Tobias has said, people want to stay anywhere on Nantucket these days. Last year was a perfect example of it. Local residential ownership is essential to keep houses from being sold to off-islanders for purely investment purposes, because people will rent anywhere on the island in order to be on the island. Article 43 addresses that. Article 43 does not. My last point is that we are a resort community, but the question is, what are we going to prioritize, the resort part or the community part? Article 42 prioritizes the resort part. It's clearly angled much more towards the real estate community than it is towards the community. In my mind, we are really ought to be aiming towards the community that we want to have stay here, the policemen, firemen, teachers, and the people whose housing is being depleted by off-island owners who are looking for purely monetary reasons to buy on Nantucket. I, for one, am not convinced that the Styler decision is so irrelevant to Nantucket. I'm not convinced that the fact that we very quickly, as soon as Styler came down and as soon as we were sued under that same agreement, that we immediately started, the planning department immediately started thinking about creating a new article that would authorize short-term rentals all over the island, I think that's a very good indication that people are worried that Styler might apply to us, and I think it should. So for all those reasons, I think we should go with Article 43. It would allow existing residents to use their residential properties, however inartfully worded. It would allow them to use their residences for income producing purposes, and it would still keep most of our housing at least within the reach of affordable housing and housing for our essential workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgia.
Hey, Galen, followed by Gary.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm an evil short-term rental renter. And wait, I don't want this. No. Yes. Okay. All right. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm an evil STR. And I have been for 21 years. I raised my son alone on Nantucket. And he happened to be really good at the violin, which was very expensive. And my parents rented STR for probably 30 years before that. And that's how we went to college, based on my parents renting STR. And that's how my son has gone to all of his educational and social and whatever other activities that he's had or wanted to do. And when I listen to all of this, I guess the only thing that makes me happy is that we're actually going to do something to make it legal, which seems crazy in my book because it's been something that's been going on for, in my world, 50 years. But I really don't like all the restrictions, and I'm very, very in the fog as to the data points that people keep bringing up. So I have a nice long list here. So as far as data is concerned, I'd like to know, what is the ratio of year-round housing to STRs to private residences? Because, you know, that plays right into all the housing battles. And I'd like to know, how much money does the town take in per year in STR taxes? And do they keep track of it, or how do they keep track of it? And can the town live without the STR if we make it so hard for people to do any STR and people stop doing it? The schools are going to be affected, and probably a lot of other places. I mean, the last time we ever argued about our basic operating budget was when I was a very young woman going to town meeting, and we haven't operated about a basic operating budget in years. I really do want to know if there is any way to find out how many houses have actually been turned from a year round to an STR. I'd like to know how many investor groups are currently on Nantucket building rental portfolios. I wonder if anyone from the town has reached out to VRBO or Airbnb. I try to. They are a corporate entity, and I give them what for every time I get a chance, because some of their policies don't make it easy for me or don't seem to make sense to me. But I'm just an average person. I don't have a degree from Yale. I'm not a trust funder, just an average person trying to make a living here. So I don't always get a response, but I can imagine if someone from the town reached out to them, maybe, you know, you could make some inroads in, you know, making a better business model that works for everybody. I'd like to know how many 10-bedroom houses already exist here, and how many of those 10-bedroom homes are actually STRs, because there's plenty of them that are private residences as far as I know. I'd like to know, are we gonna, two other questions I have, we haven't really even gotten into these health department issues. So I don't really even know how the health department is going to regulate a business such as mine, when you can have 28 people living in a house and the health department doesn't regulate them. And I'd also like to know, are we going to start regulating all the other businesses on Nantucket so they can only operate for 180 days a year, or we're going to regulate how many clients they can have? And I'd like to know, how many off-island or absentee owners are there that are actually renting STRs that are leaving trash in the yard? So I agree with a lot of the other people that have stated that the amount of data that we're basing this on, I'll tell you how this plays on Main Street to me is there's a bunch of people that have more than, who are pointing the fingers at STRs as like, less than, you're evil, you're ruining Nantucket, when we all know the real truth about Nantucket is it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. There's more and more and more people here. And there's more people that are laborers. There's more people that are professionals, teachers. There's more people that are wealthy. There's just more. And as far as, like, I know I feel like teachers are always the feel-good optic that gets thrown out there. And it's always like, oh, well, you can rent, we'll let you do an STR as long as you rent to a teacher in the winter. I wish you guys even knew how many teachers survive by doing this, because there's a lot of us. And we're already working full-time jobs. And some of us are working more than one full-time job. For example, myself, I've worked 3 jobs for my entire life. So, I don't need things to be harder. I need things to be fair and easier, if anything. And just to show my true colors, my son inherited 2 houses from his father that almost went into foreclosure. And those, we managed to get him out of that. And they're rented to people who work here. I have a guy in the winter that comes and rents my basement. So that's my what for. And I just think there needs to be a lot more homework done. And I just think, you need to hear from more people like me who are trying to stay here, because it's not just the people who need a place to rent. It's also people like me that own a home, but we're on a razor thin margin. Why do we have to go? Why do we have to not have a business here? So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Galen.
Gary Bowler?
I guess you can hear me now.
Yes.
So I'm speaking to you. I am chair of the advisory committee for non-voting taxpayers. And we've been following the discussions for the last year or 2 on the short-term rentals. And we did take a position last year. And we haven't really met on the new proposal, but parts of it are clearly unacceptable to us. And let me just say why. The good thing about the town's efforts thus far is that they're trying to look at the total framework. They're trying to put a structure in place, and maybe it needs a little bit more work, or maybe it's fine the way it is. I think I'll let further people talk and discuss what changes may or may not be needed to the proposal that Andrew and his planners have put together. The important thing to me and to members of our committee is that we have about 9,500 taxpayers pay all the real estate taxes on the island. That's how many we have, of which we seasonal people, the non-voters, pay about 7,000 of us pay 89 to 90% of the total real estate tax revenues. And the nice thing about the town's proposal is that everyone is going to be treated the same way. What would bother us a lot would be for the planning board to approve something like Proposal 43, which clearly discriminates against non-voting taxpayers. It's been made clear by Robin at this meeting that whether or not such a discrimination would be permitted is questionable. And at a previous meeting, Attorney Giorgio from the same law firm said it likely will not be approved by the Attorney General. So I think that it would be an illegal discrimination legally, but I'm not a Massachusetts attorney, although I'm legalized in other states. But I'm not making an opinion on that. I'm just saying it's an unfair discrimination. And to me, the important point is that the planning board, and I'm speaking now to the members of the planning board, I think you should not be seen endorsing any proposal such as 43 that would discriminate against seasonal taxpayers. As David said, you said at the beginning of the session, this is one community. We're all in this together, and we are. And we seasonal taxpayers love the island. Many of us spend months and months and months on the island, and we feel we ought to get the same treatment. So whatever the town decides with respect to the article number 42, that'll be fine with us because it doesn't have any discriminatory provisions. And I hope that the planning board should recognize that and say what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. We all ought to treat everyone the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Is there anyone that hasn't had a chance to speak? Megan, do you?
Okay, yes, we have Ann Deweese with her hand up.
Okay.
There we go.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been listening the whole time. I've written my own letter. I've been in the position of being a child growing up on Nantucket in a home that we had to rent at one point because my father went through a bad patch financially. I've been a renter, a short-term renter during summers when I haven't been able to come for much time. And now I'm a 4-month-a-year resident and I don't rent at all. I think that one of the issues that we really haven't focused enough on, it's been mentioned a few times, but it's this, there's something that you simply can't regulate. You can't make rules about a community. The community is something that is in many ways unique on Nantucket. The community in which I live, which is around Mill Street and some of the small streets leading to Mill Street and off of Pleasant and between Pleasant and Prospect, is a fantastic community. And many of my neighbors rent. They rent for sometimes a month, sometimes a week, but they are clearly part of the community and very active in our community. And they give a lot to the island in many ways, not just through taxes. So I'm an off-island taxpayer as well. But I think that the Article 42, which, yes, it doesn't discriminate, which means that it leaves everything open to anybody who wants to come in and make money. And these are the kinds of owners who are destroying our little neighborhood communities. Article 43 is not perfect. There may be ways to improve it, but at least it recognizes what is happening to our individual communities, of which there are hundreds on Nantucket, with the advent of mindless, soulless money machines that come into the neighborhoods, don't have any vested interest whatsoever, and either build properties that tick all the boxes for a short-term rental or convert them. And this, I think this use needs to be very much tempered down. I'm very sympathetic to people who need to rent, like the woman who came before, who said that, you know, with her violinist son. But I think we need to get the balance right. And when we have an article that has no discrimination whatsoever, or if you want to call it discrimination, simply says to anybody who wishes to invest, okay, come and invest. That's not the right direction to take. And I would like people to think long and hard about when it comes time to vote on these two resolutions, these two articles, what the importance of community is to Nantucket and how do we safeguard it. I don't think 42 safeguards it at all. The rules and regulations will help. And by the way, I think a registry is a great idea. And regardless of how we go forward on Article 42, Article 43, I think we should have a registry, because that way we will be able to, one, get data, which everyone is talking about, although I think a fair amount of it already exists if we just take the time to look for it. But it will also enable us to get a sense of what's really going on with these short-term rentals. So I definitely support the registry idea, but I'd like to think long and hard about which article better supports our local communities. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I can interject here for a second. I'm just confused. It seems to be that most people are forgetting that there's a companion article to 42 that regulates all this stuff. So I just think it's unfair to say that 42 offers no regulation. But the companion article is where the regulation is. And I think people really need to go back, read Article 39 to get a clear picture. So sorry to interject, but I've heard it too many times that there's no restricting process here. And I strongly believe there is, but that's my opinion. Is there anyone else or any board member that has a comment? Who do you have?
I have John Balash, followed by Chris Bevis.
Okay. Cam, do you have something? I'm sorry to jump in front of the.
Yeah, that's fine. I just really sort of had a couple of clarifying questions. I know that way earlier in the discussion, I'm sorry if you hear the Olympics in the background, Mom's watching the Olympics downstairs. At the beginning, Tobias would use an example such as if you live in your house for 3 weeks, then you rent for 3 weeks. So, and it's still a primary use. So that brought to me the question of, well, if I rent for 9 weeks, does that mean I can, if I live there for 9 weeks, then I can rent for 9 weeks or 12 weeks to 12 weeks? Do you see what I mean? Like, is there like a balanced seesaw that would, I live there for 2 weeks, or I, use my property for 2 weeks so I can rent it for 2 weeks. Do you see what I mean there?
Yeah.
As far as a question, to me, that's sort of clarifying sort of what 43 does in terms of seasonal people or seasonal homeowners. And I just wanted to clarify, because this grandfathering seems to come up quite a bit. Now, it was my understanding, and I could be wrong, that until we pass something, there's no grandfathering. We first have to pass something before a property or a situation can become grandfathered. So that's just sort of a clarifying point. And I'm assuming that the accessory use is in contrast to primary use, right? Like in 43, the accessory use definition in all residential areas is opposed to the primary use, as in if the primary use of your property is as a rental, then it is restricted. Do I have that right? So that might be a lot, but thank you for having me anyway.
Thank you, Campbell. Real quick, Tobias, please.
Thank you, Chairman Iverson. Through you, the intention of the article is to be a fair handshake, to encourage folks who do rent short term to stay here for 2 weeks and rent out for 2 weeks. It allows short term rentals by right for year round residents, and like it's trying to be reasonable, given all the historic rentals that have happened throughout Nantucket's history. It's trying to say, if you rent for a month, go to the ZBA and say, hey, look, here's what I'm doing. But it gives that fair shake. It's reasonable, and it encourages people to be part of our community. It's like such a win-win.
Thank you. Barry, did you have a quick comment? No, good. Okay, back to the public. Sorry for the sideline there.
We have John Balash followed by Chris Bevis.
Hi, John.
I'm here.
We can hear you.
Here
All
you
right. My question is directed to Article 43 and specifically to Tobias. I am a full-time resident here for 25 years. I have owned a house out in Sconset for 28 years, which I maintain with the sole reason to make it available for my family for their vacation. When they do not use it for a vacation, then I rent it out as much as I can to carry the costs. I have yet to turn a profit in 25 years. Yet I read the way I read 43, after whatever the year is, I would be prohibited from renting it. Tobias, through the chair, Tobias.
Yes.
That's the way I read what you've written.
Thank you, Mr. Belish. The way the article is written currently, you're correct, would, in my opinion, unfairly punish you. But the intention is that its main is a primary residence. And so I would hope that you might consider renting it out to a teacher year-round. I know that's an option potentially for you, and I would encourage you to do that to enable your short-term rental to continue. And I'm sorry I couldn't draft this warrant article to accommodate everyone, but that is my intention. So ideally, maybe to reiterate, if your family was there, and I was a member of the ZBA, and you said, hey, my family is there for a month a year, and I rent out short term, that would be permissible also under the article I've written.
My response, however, is that economically, I could not rent it at and for carrying costs at a price that a teacher could probably afford to rent it. Because it has baseboard electric heating, the electric heating bill would be so prohibitive that I could rent it for what would be a reasonable rent. But if a renter had to carry all of the utilities, it would make it unaffordable.
Fair enough, John. How much does your family come for, John, if you don't mind me asking?
It varies. They come at least 2 weeks, but given the fact that of family development at the moment, 2 weeks is the maximum they can manage.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would point out to you as well, John, is that the article I've proposed only addresses short-term rentals. So you would be able to rent, and anybody would be able to rent out for monthly. So any period longer than 30 days, you would be allowed to rent out. So I hope that helps. Respectfully.
It may help, except that in all the years I have owned that property, at least in the last 10 years, it was only last year was the first time that anybody even offered to rent it for 3 months, for 30 days. I'd be happy to rent it for 30 days. I'd happy to rent it for 60 days. But nobody wants to rent it.
Well, hopefully, John, the Article 43 will pass, will limit the investor short-term rentals, and you will be able to get more rental income out of your short-term rental.
That's your hope, but I really do not think as drafted, it addresses my problem, and I suspect there's a fair number of other people, longtime residents who have a second property that is not their primary residence, on which they rely for income. Anyway, I've had my say.
John, thank you. We appreciate that.
Okay, the last new person we have to speak is Chris Bevis. I see Kathy Baird with her hand up, and I know she was previously recognized. So I would just suggest if you're watching and haven't raised your hand or had the opportunity to speak, now might be a great time to do so. Okay, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Beavis. My wife and I own a house that we use some of the year and rent out part of the year. And I would just like to comment that a lot of the rhetoric is about, corporate entities, investor syndicates, and, mindless money machines. But nothing in Article 43 distinguishes that from Mr. Belash, who is an island resident who rents out his property, or the many of us who rent out our home, part of the time to help cover the carrying costs, may or may not retire there someday, definitely feel like we want to be part of the community. I really think it's a very divisive and deceitful approach to characterize things that way. So if they want to outlaw corporate ownership, you should craft the article in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And Kathy, I'm sorry, but I think we're just going to hold off to one comment per person. I just fear opening the floodgates. But we do appreciate you joining us for sure.
We do have Penny Dye with her hand raised.
Great. Hi, Penny.
Hi. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to make just a very quick comment. One of the things that's been missing throughout this entire discussion is fact-based information. And I will tell you I own a real estate company. Of the properties that we handle for rent, less than 0.002% are owned by somebody that owns 3 or more properties. So just to characterize these people as a majority or they're coming in or taking over, it's just disgenuine. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny.
We have Deanne Atherton.
Okay. Hi, Deanne.
Hi, Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, thank you. I just have 2 quick questions to comment. One is, does Article 42, which is the zoning bylaw, require 2/3 of a vote at town meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Can Article 39, which is the registration article, be presented and recommended without Article 42 at this town meeting?
Well, that's.
Yes, that's possible.
It's up to us, I guess. It's up to the finance committee.
Well, I would ask you to consider that, Nat. And that comes to my 3rd point, which is really a comment. I'm a year-round resident. I've lived here for 30 years. I didn't know about short-term rentals until this article came forward last year. And
That's right.
quite frankly, I'm very involved in the community and I'm engaged with other issues other than short-term rentals. So I'm trying to educate myself. And in doing that, I listened to the July 12th joint meeting between the select board and the planning board. And I listened very carefully. And your comments were, this is very complicated. We need to know where to draw the line. It's not easy for people to understand. And at the time, your chair, Judith Wagner, as reported in the minutes, said it's very important that the community have a discussion about short-term rentals. And I have sat here listening to this first public hearing since 4 o'clock. And what's obvious to me is that we do need to have you, the members of the planning board, and the members of the select board exert your leadership and bring us together to find a way forward that we all can understand. We thought that's what would happen after the last town meeting, and it didn't. And now we're in this situation. I don't think it's too late from what I've heard tonight. And I hope that you will consider that and not recommend, not lead us in a course of sort of a proceed in a way that will just be more divisive to the community. We need you to bring us together as we've done on other divisive issues. We all love Nantucket and we all want to do what's best for Nantucket. So we ask you as our elected official to please help us sort this through. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne.
Mr. Chairman. Megan,
Yes.
is there somebody else next? Can I just make a couple of comments real quick before we go to the next person? And I appreciate what Deanne
If we
said.
don't-
Okay, go ahead. Why don't we
If there's
just
no
wait?
one else,
Let's just wait. I don't know if there's anybody else.
Yeah,
I
I'd
think there was
entertain-
one more.
There's
one
not
more
anyone
person.
else. There's
Oh,
not
I thought
anyone
there
else
was-
with their hand raised.
Then I would
Okay,
entertain.
sorry, Megan.
No,
I
that's
thought there
okay.
was one more.
Nope.
Okay.
I'd entertain a motion then to close the public hearing. Unless you want to comment open, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think we don't have to make a motion just yet, I don't think. You know, we have said a lot tonight, but I think we have learned a lot. And one of the things that Robin is still on, I had written down to say at some point during this deliberation is, Deanne just said, never heard of an STR till 2 years ago. Well, that's what we're trying to fix. I never heard one either. But that's because there wasn't such a thing legally termed as that. It was just something we did anyway. So I think that we really, if we don't do something to sort of, the word legalize, I mean, we can come up with all kinds of different words, but think of this as sort of how we used to drive on the beach without stickers. No one ever cared. You just did whatever you wanted, drive on any beach you want for pretty much all your life until you couldn't. Now, not many people remember that, but you could do pretty much whatever you wanted on a beach. And we certainly didn't own the beaches, and we certainly didn't have a sticker or pay to do it. And I can tell you this, you can't go on the beach without a sticker, period. So this is an issue that we've been doing longer than driving on the beach. I can tell you that. It's just never been talked about this way. And it's a tough, listening to some of these comments tonight really have sort of flipped me a little bit on a couple of issues I didn't think would come up. The tax base issue that Gary Bella brought up, God, don't get me started on that. I'll stay away from that one. But what Galen brought up is interesting because Galen's going back to way before whenever. The boat was in Woods Hole, she's talking about. So it is complicated, but it isn't if you start somewhere. If we wanted to put more regulations on other activities that go on this island that are already regulated, you can regulate them more. We do it all the time. But it's going to get worse if we don't do something. And we have to start somewhere that makes sense. And, Article 39, You know, I've already had some messages that we already registered with the state. Well, that's true, but we need to get registered here, like we do with the steamship with your profile. Can't go on that boat and get an excursion without a profile, that vehicle. I mean, it's as simple as that. And it's a pain in the butt. I can't stand it myself, but that's how it has to work. And this is going to be a process that has to start after all the horses are out of the barn. So that's my comment, Mr. Chairman, right now. So continue.
That. Anybody else on the board? Do we have anyone else with their hands up for the public, Meg?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Steven? You're muted, Steve. You're muted, Steve. No, he's not. There he is.
Hey, there's the button. Sorry about that. So I just want to kind of take a practical look at some of this. When things get a little complicated, I like to look at simple math. And along this line of thought, if we look at, there's something like 2,200 short-term rentals registered with the state as of 2021. It's not unreasonable to round that up to 2,500. Perhaps half of those, sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold. Perhaps half of those are going to need a special permit. Let's be conservative and say a third, so 830 of them. To put in your back pocket for later on in a couple moments, figure the average number of rental weeks for a short-term rentals building, a dwelling, primary residence, what have you, is, I'll call it a dwelling, is 8 weeks. So even if you go with the conservative number of properties owners who will need a special permit, about 830, over 8 weeks, that's about 6,600 weeks of rental activity by families or relatively small groups. So we can use this in a couple of ways as pertains to Article 43 and Article 39. Just a practical application. For 43, the concern should be evident that the queue for special permits. Running those numbers, you've got 830, perhaps more folks will need a special permit in order to rent. If you lower that number even by half, the number would be an immense, really impractical pressure on the planning board staff and the planning board. Factor in other temporal aspects, which are the timeline for Attorney General approval, because you can't even get a special permit if it's not in effect. Notice requirements for special permits. Add in a window for rental unit contracts to be sourced and signed. That is after a special permit approval is granted. The end result is that thousands of rental weeks will be precluded the first year. And that's simply due to implementation. So the other aspect of that is those rental weeks, the income is required for property owners to remain solvent, which is part of the integrity of our community. I also suggest we keep in mind these folks are on Nantucket to make memories and spend money. There are bad apples in the group. But in spending money, that is not only local revenues, it's funds that fill the town's coffers either directly or indirectly. My concern is given the practicalities of an implementation timeline, that it could be a tsunami that washed out revenue sources for those local businesses, town coffers, and certainly the property owners. So I'm not going to rehash concerns about tidying up some of the language and providing some commercial use crossover in that article. I think those would be helpful, but I think if that article were to proceed, it would benefit the community. I'm saying if it were to proceed at town meeting vote, it would certainly benefit the community to be taking a look at the timelines and adding a very practical application so as to avoid financial ripples in various aspects of our community that once done will take literally years to fix. Again, I'm not speaking to the particular aspects or quality of an article. I'm just looking at practical application. On Article 39, you can use the same simple math. This is the registration scheme. this is much more doable. But timeline wise, I still think it would seem maybe another year to, maybe not another year, but a certain amount of time or some way to stage it would be an important aspect for it to be implemented appropriately without having significant financial impacts. And of course, Article 42, none of that happens, but there are other concerns that people have voiced. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Fritz?
Hi. Thank you. It's been a long night. I won't try to take too long, but I do have a few comments. First, I support short-term rentals for island and seasonal residents, but I believe that the proliferation of short-term rentals generally, now over 2,100 units, adversely affects our quality of life and economic well-being of island residents. Property values have increased dramatically in the last 2 years, and the cost of living here has become unaffordable to many. Affordability is an issue that has been talked about in every week in the local newspaper and on social media. Local businesses are adversely affected because they cannot hire workers. I believe there is a nexus between short-term rentals and affordable home ownership. Second, if we approve Article 42 at the annual town meeting, we will not be able to take it back or regulate the use under the zoning bylaws in the future. All 2,174 units will be protected. I am not convinced that we will be successful with any significant regulation of short-term rentals under the general bylaw. Yes, as Nat is fond of saying, Nantucket has a unique history of residents renting their homes in the summer. But some regulation or restriction on other uses should be considered before we approve Article 42. Finally, I think the way that Article 42 came to be included in the warrant is unfortunate and was unnecessary. Several versions were floated by the planning department, each one less restrictive than its predecessor. The last and current version was disclosed to the planning board just a few days before the warrant was adopted by the select board. The warrant was adopted without debate or comment by the select board on Article 42 because the select board did and does not have a quorum to vote on any short-term rental. I think the process has been unfortunate and is just not worked in our favor. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Fritz. How's the public? Still quiet?
Yeah, there isn't anyone with their hand raised as a member of the public.
Hope they weren't bored.
Tobias.
I'll just be brief. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone. Looks like you're wrapping up. So I really appreciated the debate, the discussion, and I want just to leave in this, no matter what happens at town meeting, let's hope that whatever laws we pass at town meeting are written really well. And so I would encourage the planning board to work on their article. And then also in line with Mr. Welch's comments in regard to the Citizens Article 43 that we put forward. We don't know what's going to happen at town meeting, what the feel is going to be. So let's make sure all the articles are analyzed well so they have a good chance of, if they do pass, they make sense, and those implications of how they're put into play work out really well. So I just wanted to say I'm here. All the folks who are interested in this issue are here to help. So whatever we pass at town meeting, let's come together to support our community. We all know housing is a huge issue, and I hope my article can help that. And here to work with you if you decide some changes might be needed to make a positive recommendation on Article 43. So thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you.
Thank
for
you,
being-
Toby. Thank you.
Barry.
Thanks. Mishmash of thoughts here. And I'm not even sure where to begin. There are certain things that always concern me when we get to articles like this that can be somewhat a little bit far reaching and they need development over time. And that's exactly what you see before you at this point. Problem identified. And now we need to grapple with what are the details behind it. In the meantime, to try to accelerate certain processes or garner certain support, there's these litany of things that begin to emerge from it to try to push in one direction or another. For example, tonight I've heard it erodes the character of Nantucket. Well, that begs me two questions. Erode how? And what is the character of Nantucket? Ask 100 people that question, you will get 100 different answers. And it's all based upon a personal look at things. There is no defining standard of what the character of Nantucket is or how it is being eroded. I would say that Article 42 will endeavor to start the process. It's not going to be perfect, but I think it will start a process that is definitely needed to be put in place. I've heard too much about how these short-term rentals bring in all of these social ills, and that that people are just being loud, obnoxious, they're trashing things. And that raises a litany of concern for me. I mean, there's probably some grains of truth in there, but the overarching aspect of it happening throughout the entire system makes me scratch my head because there's no objective data behind it. It's borderline sitting there between catering to my own worst fears and fear mongering. And those two really do not have a place in this kind of environment. Article 40, you're talking about opening floodgates. Article 43 has a real potential to open a floodgate for short-term rentals. Because by January 1st, 2023, you're telling non-residents that isn't going to happen. And as we've seen before, when you put dates into certain things like that, it can possibly open up a floodgate for that. I'm not saying it will, but let's identify what the potential is there. The strongest thing we can do, and the thing that will be the most fair for this community, is to acknowledge what's there, try to work with it, get a handle on what that means in a very data-driven, objective sense, and then take it one step further, identify what the problem areas are that need to be corrected. Putting it into a special permit, I find somewhat problematic again. Stephen was right. The time aspect of dealing with a special permit application is onerous, and his numbers are probably smaller than what they're going to be, but they're very real, and I appreciate that. That's just it's a good start to look in the crystal ball of what that's going to mean. Special permit 2 tells me that you're going there because something's already wrong with something. What is it that's wrong? So is it wrong for our non-paying taxpayers to not have the same opportunity as we do here? Especially when they contribute to a fair amount of our tax base structure. Like I said, I've got so many notes here, it's not even funny, and trying to distill them down into a few minutes worth of time is not the easiest thing to do, but I would advocate for you that to move Article 42 ahead, Let's try to get a handle on things. Let's be a little patient and try to make some sense out of it, so that as we're enacting things, and as town council has said, you had to have a rational nexus for getting to the next stage of things. And this is what the Board of Health will begin to do by their data collection, is form what that rational nexus is that would help with the quote unquote identified problems that are there. You just don't have the data for it right now. But I think that point of entry by having the Board of Health doing it makes the most sense too, because you're going to have to garner that data over time. It's not something you want to rush. I don't think it's too late. I think we're too early in terms of certain things to be able to say, okay, fine, let's take it. And it's like other things that we've addressed from the board before when it comes to community issues, is to get us into a data-driven aspect so that we can really have a sense of what that means. And again, that's fair for everyone. You can't necessarily argue with data. You can argue with abstractions on things. And that's where we don't need to go. So thank you for listening. And I know I've got more, but we've been at this for a while. So thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Anybody else? I've got a few thoughts too that I just want to share. One of my biggest concerns, I think, in this meeting has just been kind of fear-mongering and misinformation that has been thrown out there. I find it disingenuous when opponents to this article say that the planning board is doing nothing to restrict STRs. I feel strongly that that is what we are doing. And we are trying to create a framework that is both flexible, fair, and efficient to restrict short-term rentals. I think, as Andrew would say, when it comes to zoning bylaw, there's standard uniformity and fairness. And I am not sure that 43 addresses any of those. I really think that people that don't think we're doing anything to restrict this and that we're just opening the floodgates should really go back and read 39 as a companion article to 42. And then ask yourself, are we doing nothing, or are we putting in regulatory framework? So that's my thoughts for the moment. Thank you. Barry?
Yeah, just one more quick thing. Thanks to Toby for moving things forward a little bit, and that's great. I appreciate it. But most importantly, too, one of the other things that came up, which I'm just looking through my notes for, it seems as though, too, we're equating Article 43 with the automatic assumption it will create affordable housing underneath it. I don't see that anywhere. Just because you're restricting one thing doesn't mean something else is going to happen by virtue of consequence. You don't know that for a fact. There's no data to drive that again. So I'm going to read, at least that's what I heard, as an equivocation for why we need to move ahead. And this is where I want to be real careful with that. The two do not line up with each other. There may be a percentage that will happen, but it doesn't mean a 1-for-1. And I think the only way you're going to get that answer again is by going back to Article 39 and understanding what the data is that's going to be driven by. So thank you.
Thank you. Andrew?
Well, maybe I'll just yield the floor to Tobias. I just want to make sure to have an opportunity to say something before you board members conclude your discussion. So.
Okay. Tobias?
I just wanted to respond to Mr. Rector. The intention of this article is to protect what we might lose in the future. That's very clear. I'm not trying to make any assumptions that things will magically switch over from short-term rentals into year-round housing. I would hope that some of the corporate-owned short-term rentals would at least go into a pool that gives an option to maybe some summer residents who actually want to stay here and be part of our community to own a home here. But the intention, it's about the future. Everything's about the future. You know, we lose year-round housing every year. Nobody denies that. So it's about the future, just to be clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Anybody on the board? Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I just, I was just going to let it go, but I really want to put on the record on behalf of myself and the staff that how much I really do not appreciate the comments about the process here. After the town meeting that occurred and after that concluded, we spent a lot of time, all of us, trying to gather the information that we have and to bring forward articles for you all to discuss at the table. And I, for one, I think we're going to hear more about where some of these comments come from in the future, but I want to make it clear that I do not appreciate those comments if they're insinuating that the staff has done anything wrong here. These matters are complicated and they involve cross cooperation from town administration and other people. And I expect you as board members to be somewhat appreciative of the work that we do on these articles. And I don't want to interpret it the wrong way, but I believe I'll have more to say about this as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick
Anybody
question,
on the
staff?
board?
Dave, real quick, just a question.
Yes.
Andrew, on that
Please.
note, when would you bring up, I'm trying to find it, when would these articles go into effect if they pass town meeting, the companion articles? I mean, is it sort of it's not really a set date, it's more of a process on one of them?
Zoning articles go into effect basically on the date that they are voted after the Attorney General approves them. We can set an outside date, and we have done that in the past, for example, with the swimming pool articles and some of the other ones, to give people a chance to move, to either wrap up permitting or whatever that they've started. We know from past experience that the Attorney General will review articles and usually issue a decision sometime in September or October. So there's a possibility that we could, extend the date out somewhat, which assuming, Article 39 passes would give us, some of that room to deal with it. But I think if you don't vote article, there is going to be, there has to be some thought about when 43, 43, possibly there's maybe a merger of the dates between the two. I mean, that sets a date of January 1st, 2023. That's something that maybe we could, anyway, the board has the ability to set a date in the future, which is not necessarily the date that it gets voted. And we've done that in the past.
Yeah, no, that was, Barry brought something up and I made me think of that issue with the advertising issue that we ran into versus the date certain issue that we had to put in for that, which was extremely confusing. We caught somebody off guard that lost their permit at the office a few months ago, whenever that was. And I was thinking about what Barry said about the floodgate thing on the other side, like a building cap type of situation where all of a sudden people are coming in. Our articles don't cause that. They sort of, sort of a soft landing sort of situation versus a confusing public confusion. So I think that, yeah, I think that that's an important point to make too, is that this doesn't cause, you know, as much stress on people's lives. This is like, gets into estate planning and people's family issues. I mean, there's so many different things that people do. And it's insanity, like figuring stuff out, why, like when somebody rents, they have young children, they rent now, pay for the place, try to pay it down a little bit so their mortgage is less. You know, there's so many different things that people do. And when we get into, you know, all the issues with noise and stuff, I mean, that's, you know, the sad part is the state made the 31-day issue. We didn't come up with that. No, people coming here for 31 days is a long time to spend on Nantucket. I can tell you that. That's not easy to do. It's expensive. So in theory, that's a long rental, in my opinion. But that's just what we have to deal with. And I think that that's a big part of it. If we could have taken the state's definition of a short-term rental and changed it to Nantucket's version with the same financial tax system that we adopted, we might not be sitting here right now. It might be a big different situation. But somehow this term, short-term rental, has caused sort of like people to come out of the woodworks over this when it was already happening before. And I, for one, and seeing the ZBA's hearings and the HDC hearings on the stuff that they're dealing with, and there's just too much anger right now, and it's frustrating. It is, and it's not an easy thing to watch. I get along with everybody. I go in a Stop and Shop. I don't care what time it is. Sometimes I'm in there too long talking to people, but that's the way it goes. But it's tough to watch people fighting each other. And when we had that application at 8 New Mill Street for that little curb cut that's been there for 20 years, that's when my eyes were opened. I can tell you that. And I'm a changed person with this. I want to try to settle things and figure out where we are and try to get the existing boards and departments together to fix this. And it has to start somewhere. And there'll be something else in 10 years or 5 years, but we have to figure this out. And it's not going away. It's a hot button issue. You know, it affects old time families. It affects new families. And it's a mix and match issue that goes the full gamut from Wall-Winnett all the way to the tip of Nantucket. This isn't something that's a neighborhood. This is an island. You know, you can't take a zoning district and turn it into a homeowners association that separates everything. But there may be some good ideas that come out of that type of thinking. Maybe the Mill Street people will get their way and have a line drawn somewhere. I mean, who knows? But we have to start with something that we can build from. So thank you for everyone's time, differences of opinion. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for, you know, doing a good job with this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Barry.
I'm sorry, yeah, just one last thing caught my attention here. Protect the community with Article 4. It came across Article 43 protects the community, and that would mean anything else fails to do that. And that really concerns me when we get to that level, because I'm not sure protection and community, and who are we addressing in those comments? Whose community? What levels of protection? I've heard those kind of phrases before to try to support something, and it becomes an us versus them type thing. And so I want to just say I hear it, and I appreciate the passion behind it, but I also reject that statement as well too, because I think we're all here trying to do it by a various number of means, and it all depends upon how you're looking at it and what you see are the solutions to it. And sometimes those solutions are the equivalent of killing with kindness. It's just, it may be too much, or it's just not a right fit. But I just felt that needed to be challenged a little bit, because that rallying type cry always bothers me a little bit, without being able to substantiate that in terms of concrete terms. So and as Nat said, I just want to say, having worked through this process and like similar things before, it's a long process. It takes a lot of metal to have to do and stay there with this. And I really appreciate everyone's time and effort and the number of people who showed up to contribute toward it, because it always makes me as a board member pause and reflect upon what you're saying, and what the pulse speed is out there. So thank you all, and thanks for allowing me to comment one more time.
Thank you. I see that Rick's hand is back up. And Rick, with all due respect, Kathy put her hand up earlier, and we told her that that's one bite of the apple. So I apologize, but I just need to be consistent here.
You looking for a motion, Mr. Chairman?
If you think it's appropriate, yes.
I make a motion to close the public hearing on both Article 43 and Article 42. I believe that's the correct motion, because they're both being discussed together, correct? Yeah.
Uh-huh. I'll second that.
All righty. So go roll call. Nat?
Aye.
Barry?
Aye.
Fritz?
No.
And the chair's aye. Yes, Barry.
We can continue discussion.
Yeah, just a moment of discussion. I'm curious, and for sake of reconsideration, Fritz had said no against it, and I'm curious to know why. Was there more things that you thought we needed to entertain? I'm sorry, I have to ask the question. You don't have to answer it, but I was just kind of curious.
Mary,
Through you, Dave.
Yes, of course.
I stated my reasons, and I don't think I need to respond to you.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. So any more discussion? Everyone looks tired.
No, it's an unfortunate situation. We have four, Mr. Chairman, we have four really contentious issues going on in Nantucket right now. Right now, as we speak, we have STRs, artificial turf, a tiny little dinky 8 by 13 spa, and it's and the fertilizer, which is coming. And that these four issues are like, I've never seen so much. Like, I don't want to say the wrong word, but it's definitely disturbing for me to watch, because it's an amazing situation. I don't know if it's Zoom. I don't know if it's the last 2 years, what's on TV every single night. I don't know. I actually don't know what it is, but it's something, because it's not the same. I've been in many public hearings. with the original Brotherhood or 4 Chestnut, the underground parking garage, or there were a lot of contentious public hearings. I remember when an awning with a little outside dining at the side of a restaurant was a problem. Now we're out in the sidewalk and we didn't even know that we permitted the awning 15 years before and had arguments about it. There was one dissenting vote to approve the Dreamland. But that was sort of, oh, well, but it's true. But we've never had anything like this in these last 2 years, year and a half as we've had. And it is, I just feel like I want to just shake everybody and say, what are we fighting for? We're fighting against ourselves. We're against our own friends. And that's being fostered by the ability to sue, well, I wouldn't say sue, but file a complaint, whatever that specific illegal complaint is, against your neighbor or your future neighbor. I mean, it's never gotten to that in like it is now. When someone can say at a public hearing that a house 3 blocks away is affecting something with their house, I've never heard that before until a recent public hearing. I've never heard it. And that's never been said before that I know of. I mean, I just don't know what to think. I've been through the car limit stuff. I've been through the second dwelling cap. I've been through every kooky idea that Flint Randy would call the worst idea of the year you've ever seen. And now we're in a whole different world. I want town meeting to be outside, definitely. I want it to be one day. I don't care how long it takes. Bring a food truck. We only got about 15 of them now. Just bring them all in and everybody stay and don't leave, because that's where we're at. That's where my head is, and I want to get along with everybody. I want to work together and agree to disagree, but it's difficult right now. So I never thought that what would happen with the artificial turf would happen. That came out of nowhere in that project that I've been on for how many years now in that committee. So anyway, thank you. And that's it for that for the moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's crazy to me is that between these 2 articles, both parties are looking for the same thing, right? Both parties want restrictions. So
yeah,
it's crazy to me that one is fighting against the other here when we're just trying to find a way to restrict these things. And I feel like both articles represent that. One, I think, does it in a more definitive way, where another one's a little more wishy-washy. But in my opinion, we're both looking for the same thing here. So hopefully we find that spot.
I agree. And
so
if there was a way to legally say to a real estate or whatever, that they can't sell their house to Copley or whoever these people are, I'd be fine with that. But you can't say that, just make it happen by flipping a switch. These things are going to take time, but you got to start somewhere. The richer person buying the house that doesn't have to rent it is an option, because it's houses that, you know how it works. The option is somebody with more money to buy the house in most cases, that doesn't have to rent the house, like happened at 14 Mill Street. So,
and the important lesson, sorry, Nat.
No, that's it. I'm just, it's been a long year.
I think the important lesson here,
it's good for us to talk about this.
Come to town meeting so we know how the community feels and not just the people that speak the loudest. And I think that is the important lesson here. Come to town meeting. Steve.
Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, actually, that's where I was going to, just a quick comment on that. You know, Nat, I understand Nat's comments about the undertones, but, you know, for me, this was actually a pretty good process for us, albeit a little bit long, which I contributed to a tiny little bit. But it's important that we have reasoned debate and we have a chance to kind of suss these things out in a public forum. I think town meeting is a good place for that. In some ways, fortunately, in some ways, unfortunately, we're all time limited. But I would just urge people to come to the table, have some facts and figures. You don't necessarily have to have numbers, but have a transparent rationale, because, you know, we're all fairly intelligent people, and posturing and hyperbole, it doesn't do you a service, and it makes the process unnecessarily lengthy and I think cumbersome. So I'd just like to thank everyone for the discussion tonight. I thought there were some really good comments from the board, for what it's worth, I think, and even quite a few from both sides of the aisle. So it was helpful for me. Thank you.
All right, at this point, I think I would be looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion to give a positive recommendation to Article 42.
Provided that Article 39 is adopted by town meeting.
So what that motion is, yes, the motion, the prepared motion.
All in one motion. Yes, all in one motion, move that Article 42 be adopted, provided 39 is adopted by town meeting. In the event 39 is not adopted, town meeting, we recommend the following motion: move that 42 be referred to the planning board for further study.
That is my motion, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll second that.
Motion by Nat.
That will be, and that's going to be on the, that's going to be printed. Leslie, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Nat?
Yes.
Barry?
Affirmative.
Fritz?
I'm voting negative, and I just want to make the observation that my negative on the last vote was on the merits, not on the closing of the public hearing. I misunderstood what we were, the vote. So my vote on negative.
Alrighty, and I vote yes. So it's 3-1. And then a motion for 43.
I'll make a motion to take no action on Article 43.
I'll second that for discussion.
So we're going to take a vote on that. Nat motion, Barry seconded. Is that? I'm sorry.
Oh,
Nat.
No, go ahead. Sorry. You were calling me to affirm my vote or to say something?
Can I just clarify the motion? Your motion
Yes.
is on, they take no action on 43?
That's my motion, yes.
There's glitchy.
Not a not to adopt, but take no action.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
All right. So Nat motion, Barry second, roll call Nat.
Aye.
Barry.
Aye.
Fritz.
No.
Aye. So that's 3-1 again. So John coming back now, I think, maybe.
No, when I spoke with John before, he
Making dinner.
asked that you could maybe wrap up the meeting.
Okay. Leslie, your hand's up.
So I just wanted to comment on your other business item. We've included draft planning board motions for the articles for which you've already closed the public hearing and taken a vote. I've added in some draft comments on some of the articles. So if you all could take a look at those and send me any comments that you have, that would be great. And we will have this on the agenda for Monday so that you can discuss anything that you need to discuss relative to the motions or the comments.
Great, thank you.
When does it, so when do we, so we have enough time for that? We can, go ahead, Leslie.
So the FinCom hearing to discuss your motions and comments is on Tuesday, the 15th. So I would like to have it finalized by then so they can get a copy of your final actions.
Okay.
Perfect. So I entertain a motion to close. the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
By roll call, Barry motioned. Not seconded, Barry,
So yes, aye.
Nat,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
and the chair, aye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks.
Long
Thanks,
night.
everybody. Good night.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, staff.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Yes, staff, thank you. You guys are the best.
Hang in there.
Thank you all. Pressing the wrong buttons.